I will review shortly.
Okay.
Alicia, who are we waiting on?
I don't see Commissioner Strickland or Commissioner Ortiz-Gal or Commissioner Neil Jones. Were they still on the executive session?
No, we ended that.
Oh, okay. No, I mean, did they stay on that session?
They were on it, yes.
Okay.
Okay, let's give 2 minutes and we'll start at 1:05.
Okay.
While we wait to begin the meeting, we have been having these meetings via WebEx for a long time. It seems as though it's going to be the norm. And so we need to figure out, starting at our next meeting, how we can actually have live testimony from residents so that it becomes a more interactive and useful session. So I'm going to task our executive director and his communications team with figuring that one out. Other entities have figured out a way to do so. Surely we can figure out a way to do that.
Okay.
Neil, I believe we have everyone present now, all of the commissioners.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Neil Albert. I am the chairman of the Board of Commissioners. I'm calling this meeting to order. It's 1:05 p.m. This is our regular monthly meeting of the DC Housing Authority being held today, September 9th. This meeting is being held via WebEx video conferencing and can be viewed live via the DCHA website and linked to Facebook Live. If you're not speaking, please ensure that you place your devices on mute, and particularly for those of you who are joining staff or board who are joining with two devices. As is our custom, I'd like to ask for a moment of silence, and as we observe the moments of silence, I'd like for us to continue to train our thoughts to the men and women who have died at the hands of police brutality, but also the men and women in public housing who have died at the hands of COVID-19. So let's observe a moment of silence. Thank you. I'm going to turn it over to our board secretary to determine a quorum.
Thank you. Commissioner Council,
Present.
Commissioner Strickland,
Present.
Commissioner Slover, I'm sorry, Commissioner Slover.
Present.
Thank you. Commissioner Von Gossary, you're on mute. Commissioner Von Gossary, you're on mute. I'll come back to Commissioner Von Gossary. Commissioner Neil Jones. Okay, Commissioner Von Gossary, thank you. Thank you. Commissioner Neil Jones.
Present.
Thank you. Commissioner Talaferro,
Present.
Commissioner Ortiz-Gal,
Present.
Commissioner Forrester, Commissioner Falchecchio,
Present.
and Chairman Albert.
Present.
You have 10 commissioners present. You have a quorum.
Thank you so much, Alethea. As I mentioned earlier, this is our regular agenda. And in addition to the public viewing this meeting live, we ask for public testimony or comments in advance. Comments received via Facebook Live will be gathered and responses will be provided at a later date. At this time, I'd like the commissioners to consider the minutes of our July 8, 2020 board meeting and the emergency meeting minutes of August 25th, 2020. Are there any comments or changes to those minutes? Hearing none, do I have a motion to approve those minutes? Is there a second? Is there a motion, first of all?
Second.
So who motioned approval?
I think Commissioner Council did.
Got it. Thank you so much. All those in favor? If you're opposed, just raise your hand. Great. Thank you so much. Before we, so we're going to turn it over to our Executive Director for his report shortly. But before, I'd like to present a proclamation in honor of our former HCVP Commissioner, Francine St-Jean. As a result of Ms. St-Jean's departure, we have elected a new vice chair, and that vice chair is Commissioner Kenneth Council. We have a very lengthy proclamation that recognizes and honors St-Jean, Francine St-Jean, for the exemplary service to the District of Columbia Housing Authority, which we will present to her, and we will put it up on the DC Housing Authority's website for everyone to read. And we'll get it to Commissioner St-Jean at a later date. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to our Executive Director for his report.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. For the public, I just wanted you to indulge me. Moving forward, what we're going to be doing is for public and resident engagement, more than likely, we're going to be using what we consider to be the Game Changer Virtual Center. And this center is where I'm at right now, giving this presentation and participating in this meeting. And I know the commissioners and the members of the staff have seen it, but members of the public who are on Facebook paying attention and participating, I just wanted to zoom the room real quick so they know what it looks like and understand that from this particular venue, we're going to be able to provide interaction and engagement with our residents and stakeholders moving forward. So, and in this particular room, we'll be able to engage through WebEx or any other platform over 500 individuals at one given time. So this is going to be a facility that we're going to use. And it came about due to COVID and our opportunity to figure out ways to better engage our residents through the vehicle of technology. So I'm going to ask Keiko just to throw up a quick synopsis of our September report, if she would. And we're going to really concentrate on four main factors. That's going to be, property management, our capital projects, stakeholder engagement, and special projects that we have going on right now. So right now with property management, what we're talking about is still preparing our organization for a possible return to work whenever that is. We have not set a clear date on employees fully returning to work, but as that comes about, we do want to be prepared. So our building is being equipped and prepared for a return to create a safe and healthy environment where you see our lobby safe pass machine where you would pass through, it takes your temperature passes and you pass through that to ensure that there is no issues or any problems. We also have physically in our lobby now nurses from the GW nursing program. They are going to be on site for a period of time during COVID to gauge to gauge individuals, employees, and customers who come into the building via a temperature check and or the opportunity to ask them questions about whether or not they are feeling any symptoms of COVID. We want to make sure that everyone is safe and everyone coming into the building is protected, especially those individuals who are employees who are such as our OPS department who are in the building on a daily basis, regardless of COVID. So again, through property management, we are making 1133 ready for a possible return. We are putting up plexiglass in various departments. We have created our customer solutions center which will be open. And again, we're going to be beta testing that this week and opening it to the public next week, where we'll be able to engage and allow some residents to come in to deal with issues dealing with their housing choice voucher and or any other public housing issues. At any given time, we will be able to allow at least 7 people in the Customer Solutions Center to deal with issues directly by using WebEx communication with our staff via the kiosk we've installed. We are cleaning the building and the workspaces, also detailing cars. So this is a picture of everything that we have going on in the building right now. You can see the Housing Choice Voucher remodeling. You can see the Customer Solutions Center, and you can see to the top left, the Customer Solutions Center kiosk, which will be what residents and customers will be utilizing when they come into our building to engage our staff who may or may not be on site, but it allows for social distancing and keeping everyone healthy. I just want to let everyone know that we are continuing through property management, but this goes a lot further. It's our resident services program, the applied apprentice program that we have, modified apprentice training program. We brought on 40 new apprentices again this year, which tops out our total at over 90 individuals over the last 3 years participating in this particular program. They actually participated in and helped build out this particular space that I'm actually in. So we have a great group of young men and women working with us, along with other training programs that we've rolled out over the last 6 to 7 months. Those things have been going through our departments, various departments to participate in, because as we go through COVID, we're not only talking about staying healthy, but also we're talking about growing our workforce through capacity and abilities to get things done. And to do that, you need training. Our capital projects that we are working on right now, and this is the R&M update. We're at Judiciary House with Jordan Kelly Miller and Langston additions. We have done pre-phase work, which have been repaired, have been garage repair and roof replacement at Judiciary, along with roof replacement at LaJordan Kelly Miller, and some roof replacement, sanitary line and route lines of water main installations at Langston. Now, the checks, as you can see on your screen, identify things that are completed, along with other items in various phases that are under construction. The one thing that did set us back was COVID, and because some of the work that we needed to deal with required interaction between a contractor, our workforce, and residents, we couldn't move forward. But as processes and the mayor relaxes some of the orders within the district, we have been moving towards getting work done on a phase-by-phase basis. This just totals out exactly how we've used the fiscal 20 money from the district, the $24.9 million that was offered to us by and budgeted for by Mayor Bowser and also the council. We have obligated all of that money and it is under contract. We're just waiting for actual implementation to move forward through our interaction with the OCFO's office as we go through into fiscal year 21. We'll still be using fiscal year 20 funding. The additional money from the traditional R&M of $14.9 million is under the same guise that contracts have been signed, and all funds will be obligated no later than 9/30 within about 2 weeks of today. Everything will be obligated and under contract, so we can move forward with engaging actual contractual contracting and capital improvement and repairs and rehabilitation as we are able to. So this is just the start of something a little bit different. We started our transformation plan back in August 2019. The idea was to figure out how to address our $2.5 million, what we consider to be our budget gap in terms of capital improvement need. And this just talks about, and what we were saying in this particular slide is our $50 million submission plan. And that $50 million that we received from the district this fiscal year for 21 has made a major difference and change in our idea and concept of how we're going to deal with and handle our transformation plan. One important fact that I want to note to everyone is that we heard the public, we heard the advocates, we heard our residents, we heard everything that was being said to us when we began this process back in 2019. And our transformation plan will shift somewhat over the next couple of weeks, and we'll be able to unveil to the board and also the public and the residents how we're going to utilize the $50 million in a way that will allow for less displacement of residents, allowing residents to stay on site, but still allowing for the rehabilitation and quality of life improvements that are necessary so that residents can feel fulfilled. And we can also create stability and longevity within our housing stock. We are going to revamp our transformation plan. It is not going to be a complete 180, but there are tweaks that we have decided on making, which will improve our process and show our capacity and ability to get things done. This is our RFP schedule. As you can see, there are 3 RFPs that we've already put out since the month of July, along with 4 other RFPs and RFQs that we're going to be able to put out before the end of September. I think this actually meets the agency's goal of moving the transformation plan forward as quickly as possible. For new communities projects, and we'll be talking about this more in depth in about a week or so with the Board of Commissioners. But this is where we sit with the various new communities projects. Some are moving forward based on information that we'll be able to provide for a map and text amendment, in instance for Barry Farm or for Park Morton. We have begun our relocation process of residents on and off site, depending upon the preference of the residents themselves. The RFQ for Northwest One has been released for Turnkey and Sibley, which are properties that we are in control of. And Lincoln Heights, as we move forward through the new communities process, we'll have more information and be able to update everyone on those particular projects. But as this slide notes, there are off-site projects that have been completed where residents from Lincoln Heights and Richardson dwellings have relocated to already. But again, we'll be going more in depth with that to give the board an update in the coming weeks, next Friday to be exact. And then we'll be able to talk more in depth with the public about exactly what's going on with the new communities projects. So RAD, which is one of the issues, one of the resolutions that we're going to be bringing before the board today, actually 2 resolutions for Judiciary House and LaJoy and Kelly Miller. These are the processes which we've taken over the last month to engage residents, not only based on what HUD requires, but based on what we thought was necessary so that we have a good understanding of what the residents want and ensure that they participate. So we've done it in all sorts of ways. We've done a visual meeting with residents, but we've also followed up with direct calls to each resident who participated to ask if they had any more questions about what we were doing. We want clear involvement from the community, and we want clear involvement from I'm trying to read chat. I apologize at the same time. Clear involvement from the residents and the advocates alike to participate in this particular process. And what we're talking about today with the RAD resolutions for Judiciary House and LaJoy and Kelly Miller are only the first step. There's going to be continued and ongoing dialogue with everyone throughout the whole entire process. Okay. And, with stakeholder engagement, one thing that we know that we need to do is communicate better. So what we've tried to do is increase our weekly newsletter or information that goes out to not only the Board of Commissioners, but also to the advocates, our residents, and even our staff, along with partners, interagency partners in the DC Council. I think everyone really needs to know what we've been doing and how we plan on moving forward. And I think that goes a long way to our credibility at the end of the day. This is one thing that's very important. Based on COVID, what we've seen is that and heard is that many of our residents within our properties are lacking Wi-Fi or the tools that they actually need. So we've taken steps internally to contact residents directly through ORS, our Office of Resident Services, to find out, is there a technology gap or any type of gap within a household that prevents a student from learning? And if there is a gap, we make that known to DCPS. I talked to Brian Harris yesterday about making sure that list of students or families who might have issues are identified and information is sent over to DCPS so that they can engage them with whatever tools or mechanisms that they have in place. Also, there's funding set up by Octo to create an opportunity for Wi-Fi, and that's been done at Hopkins and Potomac Gardens to allow for a hotspot at those particular properties. And that's something that started this particular week. These two items are a MoCA, which is the system that we're using now for all our employees to come into the building. It's a mobile app that's on their phone that they have to fill out prior to entering the building or coming to work. And then for those employees, who are not physically coming into work, they still have to complete the MoCA app, just so we know whether or not they're feeling any signs of illness, and if they need to seek a physician's help. The other item that is noted there is Wobot. Wobot is a virtual opportunity through a phone app that allows for artificial intelligence to deal with anyone who might be in crisis or anyone who is having some type of anxiety or stress. That is for our employees, but we're also piloting it for two of our properties over the next few weeks to allow for at least 450 residents to participate in this particular program, where they can use their mobile app to talk to someone if they feel as though they're in crisis or in need. Is that my last one? That's my last slide. So there's one thing that I did want to bring up, and I think I have Grace Verma on the line. She's going to throw up one last thing, Mr. Chair. I just want the Board of Commissioners to know, we had talked about discussing this particular item. Commissioner Slover has been on us, really on me, about making sure that we are able to show what we're doing in terms of the inventory of properties and investment. And I just want Grace to show really quick, share her screen, what we've actually been working on. So you know that we have heard you, we are working on it, and we'll be able to discuss it in further detail next week.
Yes, thank you. I will go ahead and share my screen. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm just going to have a brief demo. This is, again, I apologize if it's in a development and enhancement phase still.
Grace?
Is everyone able to see my screen? I'm sorry, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, Grace.
Hey, Grace, what I wanted to do was just let everyone know, more so than you going into a full in-depth presentation, what I wanted to make the Board of Commissioners aware is that we did hear them. I did hear Commissioner Slover about making this, creating this type of dashboard for them to be able to view. And I just want everyone to know that we do have it. We're tweaking it a little bit more, and we'll be able to truly unveil it and demo it for you next week.
Okay, yeah. So this
that was
is
it, Grace. That was it.
Yeah, okay. All right. So yeah, as you can see, we have all of the projects here listed, and you'll be able to slice and dice and look at the data as you wish.
Okay, and Commissioners, just so you know, this is also going to be public facing after we show it to you, demo it to you, and answer your questions. We're going to be able to create a public facing component, which will be attached to our particular website for individuals, stakeholders, customers, anyone from the public. They'll be able to also view an aspect of this also. So thank you, Grace.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Chair, that's all I have for today.
Thank you, Tyrone. Commissioners, are there questions about Director Garrett's report? And just so that we can have some semblance of order, if you do have a question, I should have said it earlier, please type that in the chat and I would recognize you. But for right now, please raise your hands and I'll recognize you. Great. I do have a question, Executive Director Garrett. So you did say that the funding you received for 2020 capital projects were all, I can't remember what the terminology is that you use, but in essence, they're all accounted for. When do we expect the 2020 projects to be completed?
Would you like me to take that?
Yeah, Alex, do that, because they're going to vary, Commissioner, based on the type of work and capital improvement that is actually going to be. So Alex has specific dates if you want those.
Yeah. So Chairman Albert, in answer to your question, we have building-wide projects that we expect to be completed within the next 6 months. The multi-phase unit rehabs have to occur based upon the relocation plan, and so therefore we expect that some of the later phased unit rehabs will go into the end of 2021.
But they're all moving, Commissioner. They're all moving. We're not going to be standing still.
No, and we're hoping to accelerate that, although I don't have anything more to say about that at this point. It really depends a lot upon relocation of residents and making sure we can safely move people into temporary housing while we do the rehab.
Can this board get a more in-depth briefing on the status of these projects? My challenge is
Mhm.
understanding where these projects are in their various stages, particularly when we're expecting another $50 million from the city council, the mayor, and obviously through the hard work of the advocacy community. We need to be able to say to everyone that we do have the ability to get the job done. So I think an in-depth briefing would help give commissioners and the public some confidence.
Happy to do that.
Yes.
Director Garrett, we'll do it at your recommendation of when.
Yeah,
you
we
want
can
that.
do, if we have time, Mr. Chair, we probably can do it at DevMod if that works for you, versus creating a separate meeting.
Sure. I mean, happy to. I'll poll the commissioners and see if we could extend it for a half hour to an hour.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so let's move on to our resolutions. The first resolution is resolution.
Question.
Neil, I'm sorry, I sent something into the,
A question.
about a statement that I had received that I wanted to read in the record.
Go right ahead.
From a consortium of advocates. Some of these issues have been touched on already, so I think it's just sort of reaffirming some of the stuff we've already talked about, but I said I would do this, so I'm going to do it. Bread for the City, Empower DC, the Legal Aid Society of the District of Columbia, Legal Counsel for the Elderly, Neighborhood Legal Services Program, and the Washington Legal Clinic for the Homeless submit this testimony to the DCHA Board of Commissioners to address two concerns. First, the Board of Commissioners should allow for live testimony at its virtual hearings going forward so that stakeholders can meaningfully participate and communicate with the board. We understand that COVID-19 public health emergency required agencies, including DCHA, to quickly and unexpectedly transition to remote operations. However, the district is now in month 6 of the public health emergency. The DC Council has figured out how to hold hearings remotely via virtual platforms. The Board of Commissioners can and should do the same. Even before the public health emergency, it was hard for stakeholders, including public housing residents, voucher holders, and advocates, to meaningfully participate in board hearings. The resolutions that the board votes on are often not made public until the day before hearings. This made it nearly impossible to engage with proposals even when live testimony was an option. Now it is actually impossible because public comments have to be submitted in writing before the public even sees the resolutions. Additionally, prior written submissions can never be substituted for live testimony. Live testimony allows stakeholders to engage with commissioners in real time and respond to and ask questions about items that arise during the hearings. If the board truly wants public input into DCHA's operations and redevelopment plans, it must create a mechanism to receive live testimony during its hearings. Second, the Board of Commissioners should hold a public roundtable to receive tenant and advocate input about how DCHA should spend the $50 million it received from the DC Council in FY 2021 budget. As you know, much of DC's public housing is in desperate need of repair, and $50 million can't fix everything. Therefore, it is critical that the board hear from stakeholders about how to prioritize that money to rehabilitate and preserve the district's public housing stock. DCHA should release its draft spending 2 weeks prior to this hearing so the public can offer comment and recommendations. Thank you for the opportunity to submit this statement. We look forward to the board finding a way to allow for meaningful public comment in the future while it's operating virtually. And thank you for that time, Neil.
So much, Bill. As I mentioned at the top of this meeting, I do agree with the advocates. Other groups are able to facilitate live participation. DCHA needs to figure out how to do that. And so my expectation is that by the next board of live public input, so stay tuned. And then on the other issue of stakeholder engagement with regards to the $50 million, I think that's an excellent idea. I would love to chat a little bit more with the advocates about sort of what that would look like. I have thoughts. So Bill, you and I should probably talk about that offline. How that gets facilitated in the COVID environment. But I do think it's a wonderful suggestion.
All right, appreciate it.
So resolution 20-14 will authorize.
Before we get to the resolution, I wanted to ask the director, when he was showing the call center, or when he was showing the first floor, I think it should be reflected on the record who money paid for that and how was that created and done, so that can be in the minutes, please.
Mr. Garrett, did you hear that?
You're muted.
Sorry, everyone. I apologize. Commissioner Van Gossel, we utilize CARES Act money from HUD to build out these particular spaces so that we can allow for social distancing but still maintain interaction with our clients and our residents.
Was it cost effective, and who did the work?
We did the work in-house, Commissioner.
Did DCHE did the work? What do in-house?
No. Our modified apprentice training program did a majority of the work in-house. So we didn't bring out outside contractors for any of the space build out that you have seen or will see in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tyrone. Thank you, Aquarius. Our first resolution is resolution 20-14, which will authorize the formal adoption of various HCV and public housing statutory and regulatory waivers available under HUD's notice PIH 2020-13. I'm going to turn it over to our executive director. Tyrone, we can't hear you.
I'm sorry, Commissioner. I'll keep the mute button. Trying to get this technology thing down. I'm a little old. So what happens is we're going to have Senior Vice President Carolyn Punter along with Senior Vice President Larry Williams from PMO. Carolyn is from Housing Choice Voucher, do the presentation. But the one thing I do want to explain to the board and also the public is that these waivers that are going to be talked about and discussed are also on our website. As we create waivers, we make it public facing so that everyone is completely aware. And in addition, we've submitted a list of the waivers to the advocate community so that they're aware of any changes and modifications that we're making under this COVID environment. So I'm going to allow Carolyn Punter, our Senior Vice President of Housing Choice Voucher, to get us started, and it'll flow into Mr. Williams, as I stated.
Good afternoon, commissioners and everyone. So according to PIH Notice 2020-13, HUD allowed DCHA to informally adopt statutory and regulatory waivers without the Board of Commissioners approval. And as an alternative requirement, any informally adopted revisions under HUD's waiver authority must be formally adopted by the Board of Commissioners as soon as reasonable, but no later than December 31st, 2020. To that end, DCHA informally adopted 4 joint waivers that impact both the Housing Choice Voucher and public housing programs, 13 waivers that impact the Housing Choice program only, and then an additional 2 waivers that impacts the public housing program solely. So to reiterate, there are 4 waivers that jointly impact HCVP and public housing, 13 waivers that only impact HCVP, the Housing Choice Voucher Program, and then an additional 2 waivers that solely impacts the public housing program, for a total of 13 waivers in all. The 4 joint waivers that impacts the Housing Choice Voucher and public housing programs includes PH for public housing and HCV for the Housing Choice Voucher Program, waivers 2, 3, 4, and 5. So these 4 waivers actually surfaces around recertification, either delaying a recertification if a family is unable to move forward based on the health pandemic, or it also allows DCHA to utilize a family self-certification as it relates to income verification. Fortunately, we've been, very fortunate that we've been able to utilize EIV and have not had to use the family self-certification waiver as much, but we do have it here as a safe haven just in case. So again, that's PH and HCV waivers 2, 3, 4, and 5 that impact both public housing residents and the housing choice voucher residents. Said waivers were adopted on April 10th, 2020, and they are actually effective through the end of this calendar year, December 31st, 2020. Now I'll go into the additional 13 waivers that impacts the Housing Choice Voucher Program, and Mr. Williams will close us out with the 2 additional waivers that only reflect public housing. So the additional 13 waivers that impacts the Housing Choice Voucher Program include 7 waivers under the Housing Quality Standards inspections, and that is HQS 1, 2, 5 through 7, 9, and 11. Now, these waivers impact the inspections, and it allows us to use alternative methods, including a self-certification. We've used actual virtual inspections, which has actually been a great tool for us that we've perfected. And these waivers were adopted on the 10th of April as well, and their effective date is through December 31st, all but one. And that one waiver is HQS 5, which is the biennial inspection. So any biennial inspection that we have held off on from April 4th, which the effective date is through October 31st, will have to be circled back to and conducted within 1 year from the date of that inspection. So again, there's one waiver, HQS 5, wherein if we're not, and we have not done the biennial inspection, we will have to do those inspections that fell within the April 10th through October 31st time frame. Because we utilize the virtual inspections process, and we will be moving forward with doing that with our biennial inspections, we do know that we will be able to catch up with those biennial inspections moving forward within that 1 year time frame. So I'll move on to the remaining waivers that we have adopted for HCV only, and that's HCV 1, which is the admin plan adoption. So we're before you today to ask for a formal adoption of these waivers, and if that is done, we will actually update and change our admin plan to be reflective of these waivers. HCV 2, which is the virtual briefings that we've conducted. We've actually conducted over 400 virtual briefings since March 16th. So we've been able to issue vouchers and move families into their new homes, even during the COVID-19 health pandemic. We've used WebEx as our platform. We've also utilized FaceTime if families needed that. We've utilized telephonic, just the telephone as well, to make sure that we can touch and impact families that actually needed to be briefed during this time in a contactless way. HCV 3, which is the voucher extension waiver. So we have been issuing voucher extensions as necessary for our families who've been impacted by the health pandemic and not able to go out to view units within the the 180-day time frame. And so that has not been an issue. And again, this waiver has helped families tremendously. HCV 4, which is actually the HAP contract extension waiver. So this waiver actually allows us to wait up to 120 days to receive an executed HAP contract. Typically, within 60 days of a lease execution, the owner is to submit the executed HAP. But because, again, of issues or circumstances based on COVID, if it takes a little longer for that owner to provide us with the executed HAP, we can actually move forward and still make payments. So it's up to 120 days. HCV 7 is the increase in payment standards or rent increases. Now, I want to advise you that HUD required all public housing authorities that adopted the PH and HCV 2 waiver, which is the waiver that will allow to wait for recertifications or hold off on recertifications. They required housing authorities to adopt the payment standard increase or rent increase waiver, HCV 7. Now for DCHA, we're not actually in a posture to move forward with rent increases, and so we have held the line and there are no rent increases. But again, we had to adopt HCV 7 because of PH and HCV 2. Wanted to make that clear. And the last of the solely adopted waivers that affect the Housing Choice Voucher Program is HCV 8, and that's the utility allowance schedule update. And we will be doing that update after the availability period of December 31st. So with that being said, I'll punt it to my cohort, Mr. Williams, to talk about the additional 2 waivers that impacts the public housing program.
So good afternoon, commissioners. I am covering the 2 waivers that impact the public housing program. PH8, which is resident council elections. As we discussed previously, we will be doing the elections in 2021. That date has not been determined yet, but it will be done in that year, not this current year. And also the PH12, which is the agency's annual self-inspections, which basically is the inspections that we do on a yearly basis. That will be delayed until 2021 unless HUD releases the requirement before then. So those are the 2 waivers that solely impact public housing.
And I would like to go on record and say that in August, the Resident Initiative Committee had met with the Citywide Advisory Board. The Citywide Advisory Board moved forward that the election should not take place in July of 2020 due to COVID-19, and that their constituents were terrified of COVID-19. Therefore, which led to General Counsel approaching HUD and HUD giving the waiver. So I want the record to reflect that. And I also want the record to reflect this. I was not happy with that as the chair.
Commissioner Van Gosri, can we just allow Larry to finish his presentation?
But that was going to be in the minutes because that was a fact. And facts do need to be in the minutes. So no disrespect to anyone. That's what happened. That's a fact. And it's now in the minutes.
Mr. Wim, could you finish your presentation and then we'll open it up for questions from the commissioners?
I am done with the presentation. Those were the only 2 waivers that impacted public housing.
Okay, so I Commissioner Slover has a question. Commissioner Slover?
Yeah, thank you guys for your presentation, very detailed. Just one quick question. Once this health crisis is deemed over, these things will burn off and then you'll just let us know? How will that work?
Yes, availability dates are through, Executive Director. Oh, okay. The availability dates are through the end of this year, December 31st, all but 1 waiver that I mentioned. Otherwise, we will go back to business as usual after the availability dates have ended.
So this is only good through December 31st?
As of right now, yes.
And if they extend it, will you have to come back, or can we give you guys authority to just keep moving forward? I don't want you guys to spend a lot of time on something.
Yes, the resolution actually indicates that if HUD extends, then we will automatically extend this availability date.
Sorry, I missed that.
Thank you, Commissioner Slover. I don't see any other indications of questions in the chat. Great. So if there are no more questions, I am going to ask for a motion to approve Resolution 20-14. Is there a motion?
Motion.
It's motion by Commissioner Council. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Commissioner Strickland. Alethea, can we have a roll call vote?
Sure. Commissioner Slover,
Yes.
Commissioner Neil Jones,
Yes.
Commissioner Forrester,
Yes.
Commissioner Ortiz-Gallo, Commissioner, you're on mute. I'll circle back to Commissioner Ortiz because I didn't hear him. Commissioner Strickland,
Yes.
Commissioner Van Gosri, Commissioner Van Gosri, you're on mute.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Council,
Yes.
Commissioner Falchecchio,
Yes.
Commissioner Talaferro. Commissioner Talaferro, are you there? Let me circle back to Commissioner Jose Ortiz Gal.
Yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Talaferro? I don't have a response. And Chairman Albert?
Yes,
You have 9 yes, the resolution is approved.
thank you.
Thank you.
So next we'll move on to Resolution 20-15 and actually 20-16. These are both to authorize the submission of RAD, Rental Assistance Demonstration Program applications to HUD, but for 2 sets of properties, the Kelly Miller Townhouses and LaDroit Senior Apartments, and for Judiciary House Apartments. So while we'll hear from the staff on both, we'll vote on those resolutions separately.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This goes back, commissioners, and the public, to August 2019, when we started talking about and discussing the transformation of the authority and improving the quality of life through capital improvements. So what we have always been upfront about is that the funding that we received from the district, we truly appreciate, and we're going to use it to the best of our ability, as you could see from the presentation that I gave during my report. But there are other components that need to be also addressed through another source of funding, and that source of funding would be perpetuated by the RAD program that is provided by HUD or afforded us by HUD to look for other capital dollars to put into a particular property. So what's going to happen during this presentation is that I'm going to have both Jose Sousa, our Senior Vice President for Communications, and Alex Morris, our Chief of Planning, to talk just a little bit about how we went through our customer and resident engagement to discuss and talk about this with the public, in addition to a few items that might touch on scope of work for the properties as we move forward. But this is an initiative that we believe is in the best interest of the residents to improve the quality of life at the properties that they live in, but also it allows for us to create life expectancy on the buildings themselves for about 15 to another 20 years with these particular improvements or this opportunity for improvement. There's only one other piece of this puzzle, which I've talked about more than once, is that HUD is looking for housing authorities to figure out ways to reposition its properties. What we're talking about in terms of our portfolio is not a wholesale one size fits all and just doing RAD in every single case. There are going to be a multitude of different items that we're going to address through various ways as we move forward over the next few years. So I'm going to allow Alex and Jose to get started with their discussion.
Thank you, Director Garrett. Jose, do you want to say anything, or do you want me to just go for it? Go right in.
I'll just, Alex, sorry about that. I'll just, if you don't mind, I'll do the first 2 or 3 slides and then I'll kick
Sure
it.
thing.
Thank you all for joining us again, Commissioners, and the opportunity to share with you. We had talked to you in June about our efforts to pursue RAD opportunities and engagement under the COVID environment with residents at both Judiciary House and Kelly Miller LaDroit. I'm happy to report that we had a successful piloting of this effort that allowed us to, still engage with the public while minimizing the risk of exposure for staff and for residents in conformance with the mayor's order on public health emergencies and meeting HUD's requirements and taking advantage of their will. It also allowed us to use new technology that we rolled out and mirrored a lot of the engagement that we were able to do. In fact, we've learned some things that will help us in terms of future engagement that we'll incorporate into the ability to engage one-on-one with residents. Very helpful to make sure that every resident is getting touched, is receiving the information. The PowerPoints that we were presenting on, we provided hard copies to residents. And we did follow-ups both after the meetings, and we let folks know before meetings when the meetings were happening so that they could call in, troubleshoot any tech access that they were having with those issues as well. Each of the properties also had a dedicated page on the dtha.us site, which included all the meeting materials and the recordings of the events that happened after the fact. It allowed us also to use some pre-recorded videos that we share with residents ahead of time. We sent out text blasts and email blasts ahead of the meetings to remind folks when to take part. And then we allowed ourselves to convene and moderate a live Q&A with residents during the actual meetings. As I mentioned, all of the meeting materials, transcripts of the frequently asked questions, and the recordings are then posted back onto the project pages. Alex, go ahead if you want to take over now.
Thank you, Jose. So on June 10th, we made a briefing on our engagement plan for Judiciary House and the Kelly Miller Townhouses and LaDroit Senior. From June 15th through the 26th, we made WebEx calls with resident council leadership, distributed resident needs surveys, and launched an engagement campaign, including sending resident information notices, which are one of the critical HUD regulatory requirements, to each resident with info packages on RAD. And we launched our dcha.us website with project pages for each of the sites. The week of the 29th, we then collected and processed resident needs surveys. And that led into, after the July 4th holiday through the 31st of July, our first round of resident public presentations and information meetings, as well as ongoing individual engagement for both sites, for Judiciary House and Kelly Miller LaDroit. And then following up in August 10th through the 21st, we conducted our second round of public engagement, including WebEx meetings for both sites and one-on-one phone calls and engagement. Next slide. So this is the schedule that we presented back in June, and this is the schedule we've implemented as we sit here today on September 9th. We've had 2 rounds of meetings at both Judiciary House and Kelly Miller LaDroit. There were 2 meeting times during each of the 2 days that we did meetings for both sites so that we could accommodate people's differing schedules. We had meetings at 2 p.m. and 6 p.m. at Judiciary House on the 22nd of July, and the same thing on July 30th, 2 and 6 p.m. for Kelly Miller LaDroit. We then did direct household outreach via phone and digital outreach. And then in August, we did the same thing again. We had a second round of meetings with 2 different meeting times and direct outreach. One thing I should note here is that in all of those meetings, we recorded all of the questions that were posed during or before the meeting, and wrote them all down and provided written responses back to the residents. We printed those out and gave them back. Those responses are part of the public record for all of the meetings, and all of those responses will be made public, and they will also be submitted to HUD along with our Commitment for Housing Assistance Payment, or CHAP, application that would be going in, provided that the board sees fit to vote these through at this meeting. Next slide. So here you see on the left-hand side of this image, the list of meetings that were held at Judiciary House and LaDroit Senior and Kelly Miller Townhomes, and a list of the discussion points. We had a formal agenda for each meeting where we introduced our key presenters. LaShawn Douglas, who kind of was the MC of the meeting, Mr. Jose Sousa, who talked about COVID-19 and our engagement strategy. Myself, I talked about the particulars of RAD and why we chose to do RAD, and what we're doing with the district's money currently to bring these buildings up to a state of good repair. We also had representatives of our ROTC program talk about the relocation process. In both cases, in Judiciary and Kelly Miller LaDroit, the relocation process will be on site. We're making units ready in both buildings, and we already have them ready for people to move into temporarily. And those moves will take between 4 and 6 months for each phase. And then we also had a representative of the Office of Resident Services to talk about the services that are available to residents even now that they could make use of, such as workforce training and other resources that are available to them now. Next slide. So when we had the meetings, we always emphasized in the meetings, what are the rights of a resident in a RAD property? You have a guarantee to return with no rescreening. You don't rescreen when you sign your new RAD lease. Full relocation assistance, including relocation of utilities. If you've got Wi-Fi or phone or cable TV or anything like that in the building, we pay to reestablish the service in the temporary unit and then move you back. All the moving expenses also, the packing materials. If you need people to help you box your stuff, we take care of that. We pay for it all as part of the work. After the RAD conversion, the resident councils would be funded in exactly the same way as they're currently funded. And the resident rent would still be based upon 30% of adjusted income, just as it is today. Next slide. Here's our projected timeline. You can see in red the DCHA board meeting in the third quarter of 2020 in both cases, and then the process forward from there. So provided we get the approval from you as board members today to advance these, we will put in CHAP applications for both projects to HUD, for Judiciary House and Kelly Miller LaDroit. With those applications, we will submit all of the written questions and responses we provided to the residents as part of the application process. We also are, making units ready, as I said, for resident relocation. In both cases, Judiciary House and Kelly Miller LaDroit, we've received district funds already, and we're starting to implement the phased rehab of the buildings. The CHAP approval, we're hoping will be approved sometime around the first quarter of next year by HUD. And then we'll submit our RAD financing plan, and we anticipate the RAD closings, if everything goes according to schedule, sometime in the first quarter of 2022. Next slide. So one of the things we talked about in the RAD resident engagement was that prior to submitting the application to HUD, all residents were provided a RIN, a resident information notice, to convey general information on project plans and basic resident rights under RAD. And we conducted 2 resident meetings. We actually did 4 meetings during this process with both sites because we did the 2 times during each day. We provided printouts of each presentation to residents so that if they couldn't get online and see it online, they could read it on paper. And we recorded all the questions and responses and provided those back to folks in writing. We also ensured effective communication with persons with disabilities and language barriers by translating materials on request for any resident who needs it and printing those translations out to residents and mailing them to them. And also doing individual follow-ups with the language line access interpreters for anyone who is non-English speaking and needs questions answered about the meetings. We will be having 2 additional meetings after the CHAP has been approved with residents before submitting our financing plan to HUD. That would be our plan for how we're going to operate the building and do any additional improvements with financing. And other meetings will be necessary if plans change or if we decide to, or we need extensions from HUD. Next slide, please. So all the meeting recordings can be viewed at dcha.us/judiciary for Judiciary House or LaDroit in the case of LaDroit. At the Judiciary House meeting, the advocates who were on the call said, thank you for adding some clarity and for the in-depth information. They look forward to staying on top of the process, and they're here to help in any way. I think that they were very appreciative of the way we, in the COVID situation, were able to do effective outreach. Everyone was given a chance to ask questions. All the questions that we were able to answer on the phone, we answered. And if we couldn't answer it, we told folks that we would make a more detailed response in writing, and we did that. General questions were things like questions about possible change in ownership if outside investors are solicited. There will be a change in the ownership, but in all cases, DCHA will remain as the sole general partner of the project. And so we are maintaining ownership in the literal sense of the project. There was a question about the pace of improvements. We made the point about how we wished we had been farther along at this point with some of the phased rehab work, but COVID has forced us to impose new restrictions on in-unit work with contractors. We don't want to put anyone in jeopardy by having contractors and residents in close proximity to one another. And so we have taken a little bit of a slower approach to the phased rehab. And there were other general issues about, other maintenance and management issues. We always had the management on the call with us. So on-site management was able to field those questions immediately, get a work order written, and address it proactively.
Alex, if I may, really quick, just wanted to add one more thing to supplement this. When I mentioned that there were some lessons learned, there was an immense value also, commissioners and to those watching the public, ability to also provide materials to residents could not have happened without the support of the ORS team and PMO. I mentioned Alex, there were calls to address not just the RAD questions that came up, but also any of the individual unit questions that came up. And so we were able to attend to those quickly with the help of the housing managers. And so the PMO team was an integral part of what we were doing through this as well.
Thank you. Very good point. So here we are, September 9th, our board meeting. What we are requesting with these 2 resolutions is for the board to provide authorization for DCHA to apply to HUD for a commitment for a housing assistance payment, or what's called a CHAP, for Judiciary House and LaDroit Senior and Kelly Miller Townhomes. This authorization by the Board of Commissioners for the CHAP does not lead directly to a conversion of the property. And I just want to be very clear about that. The next step after HUD approves the CHAP would be that HUD would hold an additional, DCHA would hold an additional 2 meetings with residents before submitting a financing plan to HUD, and the board will have a chance to review at a future board meeting and have the opportunity to approve that financing plan for each project prior to submission. So this is not the last bite at the apple for the Board of Commissioners. We're asking for the first step, which is to put our application in and get in line with HUD to get the commitment for housing assistance payment. That is the purpose of these two resolutions. Next slide. Next slide. So that's our thing. If there are any questions and comments, we're available to answer them.
Great. Thank you so much, Alex. So I know Commissioner Talafaro has a question, so let's start with him, and then Commissioner Slover has a question, and I have a few questions.
Alex, this is for Alex. Alex, you told me like a year ago that your plans was to show the tenants what are you doing. Some tenants don't know what some of the properties are going to look like, and I didn't get no feedback on that. That was about a year ago. And now y'all bring me other stuff you want me to waiver for. I will go for it for this time, but next time, no, because I'm talking about achievement. Y'all achieved, I know the virus issue a little bit on that, but y'all ain't achieved nothing else. And y'all achievement grade is, let me finish. Y'all achievement is very bad. I mean, the communication is a little better, but the achievement, people want to see, and people haven't seen anything, so I'm going by what my residents tell me. And I'm really not happy with it.
Mr. Chair, would you allow me to, I don't know if Keiko can do it, but can she throw up the slide again, which shows what we've actually completed with the utilization of the 39.4? Is that necessary to show what we've actually accomplished thus far? And we have been met with, as Alex pointed out, COVID, which didn't allow us to get into some of the units based on some of the scopes of work that we've actually wanted to endeavor.
Yeah, if you can do that real quickly, because we have other questions.
Keiko, can you throw it up real quick?
Sir, while
doing it right now.
Okay.
And Commissioner Talafaro, if you'd like to see one of these recordings themselves, you can also, on the website, the recordings show that the whole presentation is up there, and we did provide the phasing updates as well as what the
Keiko, just go back to the previous one, Keiko.
But you advised, but I don't see it.
I'm sorry.
That's what I'm telling you. I see more than
Mr. Chair,
my eyes. Let me finish. Y'all really let me finish.
Go ahead, Commissioner.
My eyes see more than some of the commissioners. I go to my properties and see a lot of stuff, and I have not got no definite answer, feedback, or none. So to me, let me finish. My trust is gone.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, go ahead, Tyrone.
As you can see from what we're showing you, these are the projects that are actually underway at the various properties, Judiciary House, LaJoy, Kelly Miller, and Langston Additions. As I stated, they're in phases because there's only so much work we can do under the COVID environment, unfortunately. If we could do more up to this point, we definitely would have. But again, all the money has been identified, it has been obligated and contracted, and as we're able to do more work, we will do so. But this slide represents exactly what has been accomplished and what is in the future for these particular properties.
And Mr. Garrett, I'll just add to that also, again, back to the videos in question. The recordings of all these videos are up there. You can hear directly from residents who have opined on the work, some of the work that's happened already, and also the questions around relocation. It's not just the considerations for what COVID does, but it's also that we're relocating in many instances on site in order to make this as unobtrusive as possible. And so you hear directly from the residents what has worked and where areas that we can improve. So I encourage you to go check out those videos, and they're out there for anybody to be able to see as well.
I'd also like to just jump in. Commissioner Talafaro, I know you've been clear with me in the past about wanting to see renderings and pictures of projects, but I think the real proof is in the finished product. If you ever want to tour the work we've already completed at Judiciary House or LaDroit Kelly Miller or Langston Additions, I'd be happy to meet with you. Just let me know what day you want to do it. I'll come down to DC and we'll take a walk. I'll show you the garage. We did a beautiful job in the garage at Judiciary House under the building. That thing has been structurally repaired, painted, and lit. It is now brighter and safer and much better condition than it's been probably in 15 years. The roofs have been replaced at all three properties. I don't know if we want to go up to the roof or not, but we can take pictures and I'll be happy to share photos with you of any of those roofs. We've painted all the units at Kelly Miller Townhomes, and we're starting to do the balcony repair at Judiciary House and replace the windows. And that's going to make a major improvement in tenants' lives. I
just want to jump in before we call on Commissioner Slover. Back.
Hello?
And all the progress at the 3 properties. I think what Commissioner Talafaro is talking about and what he constantly shares is sort of the day-to-day conditions within those buildings that still need to be addressed, that he thinks, and in many cases, I think, don't get the kind of attention that they need. So I applaud all the capital projects that are underway, and hopefully it will lead to better surroundings for our public housing residents. But at the same time, I think what Commission is trying to do is to give us a sense of urgency around the regular mundane maintenance that needs to occur in these buildings.
Because like I've been trying to tell Mr. Gerd, about the virus, I understand you shut everything down and did all the maintenance and everything, but when you did that, you should have had the maintenance on the board 100%, because you got people getting sick just because the building is dirty. And I don't understand. I don't understand your logic.
So let's go to Commissioner Slover and then Commissioner Van Gosri. I think Commissioner Falcecchio and Commissioner Council have questions.
I appreciate the time. I just heard a reference to the fact that this will not be our only opportunity to weigh in on this. But in looking at your project timeline sheet, there isn't referenced another time for the board to weigh in. So I just want to make sure that hey, if there isn't that, did you add it to the timeline? Because it shows in red this moment, and then it shows RAD conversion. It doesn't show another opportunity for the board to weigh in. So that would be great if you could add that. So can you tell me how much? I assume we're doing these together, Neil. This conversation.
Yeah, we are. Yes.
Okay. Can you tell me how much of each of these things cost to convert?
When you say cost to convert, I'm not sure I understand.
Are we talking about the remaining cost? Are you talking about the remaining scope of work, Commissioner?
Correct. I mean, you have to bring them up to a certain scope to be able to convert to RAD, correct?
Well, that's one purpose of RAD, is to sometimes use capital improvement, the capital improvement process. The other side would be, as you know, to bring financial stability. I don't know if Alex has off the top of his head, or if he has it in his notes, the actual proposed scope dollar amount for.
I do actually. I was pulling that up when you asked that question, Bill.
Okay.
I want to try to get that. So currently we're spending just under $14 million at LaDroit Senior and Kelly Miller Townhomes. And when we finish that $13.9 million, that will put those buildings into a state of good repair. And so our proposal for the LaDroit Kelly Miller RAD conversion is that we do a conversion similar to what was done at Colorado and Columbia, where we convert after the work's been completed. So there will be no debt, so to speak, on that project. We will do the work and then convert the building. In the case of Judiciary House, we don't have enough money in the current allocation of 2020 funds to fully do the building. And so we're doing about 108 units plus the roof, plus the balconies, putting a full sprinkler system in all of the units where they currently only have a common area sprinkler system. We repaired the garage. And so that's about 19.8 million, and we'll need almost 35 million to finish when all is said and done. So we will need financing for that to do the complete work on all the rest of the units in that building.
Because I'm looking at your 20-year plan from 2019.
Right.
And you have $13 million capital needs assessments for Judiciary House. Is that number gone up that much?
Yeah, yes. Honestly, yes. When we got into the building, I think I mentioned this before, and you challenged me on this point on a previous meeting, that the physical needs assessments, if you don't insist upon seeing what's behind the walls, the physical needs assessment will take an assessment of what people can see and touch out in the unit itself. When we got into the building and realized this is a 1965 building, it needs more than what was in the capital needs assessment. Part of that was because it's 1965 construction. A sprinkler system was not required in the units in 1965. In 2020 it is. And so when you touch a building up to a certain level, you have to then also bring the building up to code. And so there's several $1 million worth of additional work that's required for that.
And Commissioner Slover, can I just add one point to what Alex was saying before you ask your next question, if you don't mind?
Sure.
Thank you. What I wanted to add was that we were working off of an old physical needs assessment when I came on board. We went in and we tried to update it as quickly as we possibly could. The one thing that we do note, and you're aware of also, is that we have gone out to get a new physical needs assessment of all of our properties in conjunction working with the OCFO's office to prepare a capital improvement plan that ties into the transformation numbers that we previously have talked about. And the one thing that we are going to be moving forward with, as I said, there's going to be a slight revision to our transformation plan in essence. We're going to be taking into consideration some additional costs that were not originally calculated. So there will be a shift in terms of dollars and cents. One thing I do remember in having a meeting with the OCFO's office with Mr. DeWitt was that when we noted what we believed to be our capital need across the board, he actually stated himself that he thought our number was somewhat low.
Okay, appreciate that. So all the money that you're talking about here is currently planning on is coming from the city funds. So all of the dollars to renovate the properties under resolution 2015 and 16 will be coming from DC funds.
I'm not sure which one is judiciary. If it's 16, I think it's 16. In the case of judiciary, we will need to seek financing after we get the RAD chat to do additional work there, because we'll only
raise my question. The work that we're approving here, the sort of RAD conversion, I'm trying to do, because you reference a lot of this stuff in the notes about where the money's coming from, the allocations from the city are enabling you to move forward with this. So is it the money you're using is all from the city?
The money which would be, go ahead, Mr. Garrett.
I was going to just say, Commissioner, phase one of the work is coming from the city for, let's say, judiciary, but there is a phase two effort that Alex is referencing, which leads into the RAD conversion. But for Kelly Miller LaDroit, 100% of the work, as Alex pointed out, can be done by the district funding. But now we need to stabilize the property financially so that we can keep a capital fund to make future improvements if necessary. So we'll be able to have a reserve amount because right now, based on the public housing dollars that we're receiving, we cannot.
Okay, so when this conversion takes place, that leads into my next question. What will the change in subsidy stream be that we keep hearing about? So today it's X and post-conversion it will be Y. What's X and Y?
Well, so X is the annual contributions contract from HUD, Section 9 of the public housing.
How much is that?
How much is it? For Judiciary House, I don't know. It's given out per unit, per building. So
Commissioner Slover, I showed that slide last week. I'll bring it up now. I'll try to see if Keiko has it, and I can bring up that one line for judiciary. Keiko, can you find it?
We don't need to bring up the slide. I mean, once you find the number, you can.
Yeah, Keiko will send me the number, but she has it. Keiko, I just need you because I can't do both things. Keiko, I need you to pull up that slide and give me
what the number is today and what it would be post.
Yeah, that's what I want to do. That's what I want to give to you.
Okay. And the next question would be post conversion. Would there be a reduction in the capital budget for these RAD properties?
There would be a reduction in the capital budget, yes, but you would make up for the capital need or the capital budget for each individual property through the RAD conversion itself. So now these would be self-sustaining buildings that would have to create its own reserve based on the project-based voucher model.
Okay, because what I see our capital budget in 2018 capital fund plan and the 2021 capital fund plan both have $1 million deducted for the RAD program conversion fees. Is that going to increase as you do more RAD?
Possibly not, because the way we're doing it, also one thing you want to consider is that the conversion, we're doing conversions in blocks versus doing individual conversions. So although we have allocated a dollar amount for both properties, because we'll probably finance them together, it won't cost that much. Similar to what we're doing with the Melville RAD initiative, where we have 5 properties together. That cuts down on actual cost.
But I'm asking if there's going to be a continued erosion of the capital fund to properties that are RADed, because I thought the whole point of them being RAD was that they were out of HUD's. They were no longer part of traditional public housing.
Correct. They're no longer traditional public housing, but they're funded through the project-based voucher program. So those, although you may lose funding in the capital fund, possibly, and that's not a fatal complete that you would, you make up the difference for each property based on what you bring in based on the PBV. So you've done the redevelopment projects yourself where you've had to set up your own replacement reserve. This would be the same thing.
I understand that, but at the moment we're losing $1 million a year to a very small capital fund to RAD to very few properties, and I'm wondering if that trend is going to increase. And I don't
But the capital fund, as we know it, Commissioner Slover, and we can go back and forth and have the debate. The capital fund, as we know it, as we actually receive from HUD right now, wouldn't be able to sustain those 2 properties as they exist now. Alex just pointed out what the dollar amount is to bring them to viability and stability is over 30. For one, it's still over $35 million, even after we have an influx of capital. So even receiving $1 million, additional $1 million from HUD for the capital budget still would not improve the quality of life for those residents. We still would have to go out. It's not enough. I mean, the capital fund is not enough to begin with. So
I understand that point. I'm trying to make is that the whole point of RADing something was to shift the expenses to a different place, but it seems to be taking money from the capital fund for the last 4 years.
No, the point of RAD is not to shift. The point of RAD is to bring in more dollars based on my experience and my experience as an executive director and my involvement in doing RAD projects, because this is the first one that I've done. What we try to do is we try to solidify and stabilize the funding source for the particular building so it can be improved through capital needs. That's the true purpose of hold on, I'm sorry, Commissioner. That's the true purpose of RAD. It is the opportunity for housing authority such as DCHA to make improvements to its property by leveraging outside equity. What we're not doing is, for instance, San Diego, who converted its whole entire portfolio to a project-based model, losing all of its capital fund. And the reason that they did that was because they wanted a better financial model and they wanted to control their fate in terms of capital improvement. So that is another method. That's not what we're talking about here, because at the end of the day, no matter what, we're still not going to get enough capital fund into our coffers. So this takes the ability to take 2 properties off of the capital fund budget line that we would not be able to sustain any way else.
But they're not coming off the capital fund. We're gonna discuss this later because I
Okay.
was surprised.
I think we want the same thing. I think we have 2 different approaches.
Okay. Okay. So based on the fact that you're bringing up the one property to 100% viability and you don't need any more money, why do you need to RAD it?
Because just as I said, we're not getting enough capital fund in, Commissioner Slover. So when we don't get enough capital fund in, you may bring it up to viability, but you're still going to have to maintain it. There's still going to be some time in the future where you're going to have to fix a roof. You're going to have to fix some system. Something's going to happen. And we're not bringing in enough money within that building based on the ACC subsidy that we're giving to HUD to create a replacement reserve for that property. So we'll fall back or slip right back into the same thing we were in before because not enough money is coming to that particular property to create capital improvements or prepare for capital improvement.
Why is it called, why is this a demonstration project? Why is a demonstration project a permanent funding stream?
Through PBV, yes.
So it's permanent so how long does the subsidy last on a RAD?
You continue to do renew the HAP contract. It would be like any other project-based voucher or HAP 202B program that was invented back in right around 1980, where the multifamily department of HUD funds it through a different budget line. And so it continues on. I'm not going to say in perpetuity because nothing's that long, but it does have a covenant attached to it that will allow for at least 30 to 40 years off up front and the requirement for a renewal going forward.
How long does the current ACC subsidy last?
It's supposed to last forever, but it still dwindles and it hasn't gone up with the inflation. I'm sorry, Commissioner. I need to go. So for Judiciary House Commissioner Slover, right now the operating fund for Judiciary House is $502. Okay, what we would, that's with capital fund money attached to it. What we would receive through weighted contract or a weighted PDD rent would be starting anywhere from $941 up to let's see, we have 110%, $1,600 back in rent. So that's what allows us the cushion to be able to create its own capital fund and replacement reserve. Thank you, Keiko.
All right, thank you for those numbers. And the final thing I want to discuss on this is when we passed Resolution 1901 to sort of green light this process of looking at evaluating our portfolio and trying to come up with creative solutions. We had a lot of discussions around what the role of the board was and what information you would provide us so we could make these decisions. And then part of Resolution 1901 was Exhibit B, which is the guideline for Board of Commissioners oversight and evaluation for property repositioning proposals. Do you remember that?
Yes, sir.
So we've had this discussion so many times about this, number 5 and is the deal summary template. You were going to provide that as part of this thing. And the reason I've kept pushing to try to get this information from the agency is because we have to take all of our assets into consideration as we move forward, right? So the reason I've pushed so hard and others on the board have pushed so hard to understand the condition of all of our properties is to make sure we're doing the best we can with our money. And I'm not saying we're not, I'm just saying I don't have the information to make those decisions because you said you would give us this information and you haven't given it to us. And now you're asking us to approve this rad chap, and I get it, it's not the fait accompli, but it's an indication that that's what you think is the best thing to do with this property. And I get that that's your job, but the job of the board is to provide oversight and to make sure that we agree, or at least can have a discussion about it. And the way for us to make that decision was through Exhibit B of 1901. And we don't have that information.
So Commissioner Slover, what we're actually doing is we're providing information to you in real time as we move forward. So our next step is to provide, because every deal that we have is not going to have the same scenario, and every deal that we encounter is going to have different nuances that we'll have to present to you in a financing plan. So before we go any further, all we're doing with this particular step is getting in line. Because what's going to happen and what happened before was that we lost opportunities because we didn't act. We didn't take steps to move forward. And so we were put to the back of the line. So now we're getting back in line, but at the same time, we'll be able to bring more information to you as we start to move through the financing component. And it'll be each individual deal. That's the best way we'll be able to do it because that'll allow for real-time scenarios that you'll be able to address.
But you must have done some analysis to determine that these were the first best two to start. There must have been some analysis done.
Oh, yes, Commissioner. Remember, hey, Commissioner Slover, remember we gave you the McKinsey tool, right? The McKinsey tool that you use was one of the basis. I think you took it home and you tried to prep you with it. I think that was one of the foundation and basis for moving in this particular direction, identifying what some of the needs were at many of the properties throughout our whole entire portfolio. And that's actually what set the stage, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, Alex, because you worked on it a lot more than I did with the tool. That basically set the stage for us to identify what the first 14 properties were that we would hit, and also create our plans for a phase 2 and a phase 3 in the future.
Alex, please keep your response succinct because we have a number of other commissioners that would like to weigh in on this.
Yeah, I mean, I basically agree with Director Garrett in the sense that these were the two straight rad conversions that we had in our transformation plan. And these are the ones we're bringing for that reason. We later reevaluated the other two, Langston and Potomac, of course, and we'll be bringing those next month. But LaDroit Senior and Kelly Miller Townhomes and the Judiciary House were evaluated through the McKinsey tool, and were ultimately we made a determination to place them transformation plan as RAD conversions for the reasons of what we're determining from the McKinsey tool.
Great. So Commissioner Slover, I'm going to come back to you. We do have some other commissioners in the queue. Commissioner Von Gossery?
But Neil, I'm sorry, but I just haven't gotten an answer to whether he thinks he's provided Exhibit B, which what he agreed to do.
No, I think he said he was providing it in real time.
But that's not what was agreed to. That was not what was agreed to. We agreed as a board to get this information prior to having to make these decisions. This happens on this board all the time. We say we get promises made, and the time comes, and you're like, oh, we'll get it next time, or we're going to do it.
So Commissioner Slover, before we can do anything, before we can convert the property, we have to have your blessing, your approval. So that means we have to bring to you a financing plan that you approve of and that you appreciate. The one thing that I can say about my team is that we do have the capacity and the experience to be able to provide the proper information to you to make an educated decision. And we're going to do that. And sometimes, you know what, when you're on the ground, situations and circumstances do shift and change for you. And then you have to make certain decisions. So the decision now based on the team, and I'm leading it, is that we have to give you information in real time because things are just changing so much. The dynamics are changing within the organization. If we had gone through with this before we had, and the thing about it is the $50 million changes some of this also. So we could give you something today, but make a decision later in the month that, hey, we might not need as much financing for this particular project for a various reason because we've redirected and think we can improve our scope of work in some way, shape, or form. That would change the financing plan, and we would have to bring it to you. So we're not going to do anything different. There's not going to be anything done behind closed doors. You'll see the financing plan and what the scope of work actually looks like that we're talking about.
But Mr. Garrett,
Yes.
moving forward, and to Mr. Slover's point, in Resolution 1901, we asked specific information. It was provided. I understand you're providing it in real time, but I do think for us to do our job, to do a kind of analysis and oversight, part of it is getting what we asked for as a board. So even if you're presenting it in real time, that's additional information, and we welcome that. But we can't pass resolutions if the substance of the resolutions are ignored. I think it's the point that Mr. Slover is trying to make. And so, moving forward, if there's a way that you guys could provide us that template, that requirement beforehand, and even if you have to provide information in real time, that's up to date, I think it will be received better by this board.
No problem. I think Central Sankara, the director of the Department of OCP, is on the line. So I'm sure he's taking note of it, and his team will be prepared to do that.
Great. Commissioner Von Gossery.
My concern about the RAD was my constituents who do not have a resident council. And I want the minutes to reflect that they do not have a resident council. And I would like for someone to tell us how are they making decisions. And that's LeDroit Park family. Thus far, it seems as though, and correct me if I'm wrong, that LeDroit Park family senior is making decisions for the family property. And as we all know, I'm territorial. And I don't like nobody making decisions for nobody else's community because you don't live in it. So how are my constituents playing a role in this RAD, and who are educating them?
I can let Jose talk about that, but Commissioner Van Gossery, remember, we're engaging those individual residents directly. So we're seeking out their input and fielding their concerns. Even though there is no resident council or one person to go to, we're talking to individual residents and gathering their information and how they feel about the particular process and what they would like to see included in possibly a scope of work or something that we haven't done. So, in lieu of a council, we've been dealing with residents individually.
Thank you. Now, my last question is, how come this RAD is only for a 15-year life cycle and not a 20?
Because that's the way I'll leave that to Alex because he's the planner. That's what he does. But I can't tell you why it doesn't go to year 16 to 20. I think we're shooting for 15.
RAD would give you up until 20 years life cycle is the max.
No, that depends on the scope of work. I'll defer to Alex on that.
Well, if you're asking about the viability of the project,
Mhm.
our plan is to put the project into HUD's definition of 20-year viability, which basically means that the property does not need any major rehab or major replacement of total building systems for 20 years.
But on the document, you have 15.
15 is the minimum.
20.
Well, no, 15 is the minimum period for the HAP
Minimum.
contract.
I have one other question. Is there any housing authority within the United States doing a RAD and they're using a 99-year life cycle? Yes or no?
No,
Do you know?
not that I know of.
Is that possible?
I think we're getting our acronyms a little mixed up. I think you might be talking about a ground lease or something like that that goes 99.
Yeah. Can you have a ground lease with a RAD? Yes or no?
You can do a ground lease for 99 years, yes.
So no, my question is, this is yes or no. Can you have a ground lease for a RAD?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Commissioner Van Gosri.
Now, in the District of Columbia, why did we not see that as a vital way of sustaining affordable housing in Ward 5? I mean, in that ward.
I'll defer to Greg on the legality of that. Greg Mays, our general counsel, because he has history of transactional situations like that. I don't see the distinction, but he may have a different opinion.
Okay, thank you.
Greg, do you want to opine? Or not?
Yes, so let's make sure I understand the question was concerning a ground lease?
Yeah, my question.
I'm sorry, Commissioner Van Gosri, I'll give it to him, because I think the question wasn't so much about the ground lease, Greg. It was about the ability for the property to remain affordable for, in perpetuity almost. And I think this is a discussion we were having just the other day about ground lease versus, deeds and other regulatory documents that might allow for affordability to go well past 30 to 40 years.
Right, and there are a myriad of options that you can choose. You can choose a ground lease, deed restriction, controlling documents. So that opportunity to do that has been done by other housing authorities, and certainly can be done in this transaction as well.
Could you give us, would you be so kind as to give us that particular type of information for a tool? I learned that from another commission. And see, that's why I'm going on record and saying this. That's why it's important in this board that we really do comprehend, understand, and go beyond the because we talking about the District of Columbia, where everybody wanted to be like DuPont, and everybody that's poor economically will not have a place what is called affordable, because affordable is different in every single member district.
Thank you. Commissioner Van Gosri, do you have any additional questions?
Oh, aren't you glad?
No, I always like to hear your questions. Very informative. Commissioner Falchecchio.
Thank you, Chairman. This goes back to the FY 2020 locally funded capital projects. I was just wondering, the board had a resolution to try to ensure that with local dollars that we did see CV spending so that there was district businesses utilized. I was just wondering if we do have it all contracted out, the funding encumbered, how we were doing with meeting the board's goal.
Commissioner Falchecchio, I'm glad you asked that question, because on my original presentation that I gave to you, performance, I didn't get to page 47. It's there on page 47, commissioners, and it identifies that CVE for the fiscal year 2020 was at 69%.
Fantastic. By my count, I think you got to slide 46, so we almost got there.
Did I? Okay, almost got there. One slide short.
That's great. Let's try to keep that up for for the future years as well, especially as that local contribution grows. That would mean a lot to keeping money in this economy in the district. So,
and we're always striving for 100%.
Fantastic.
So John, if I can just piggyback on your question, and I'll get you, Commissioner Counsel, and this is a question that I'm surprised the Curtis did not ask, so I'll ask it on her behalf. Are there any Section 3 requirements and or benefits as part of this RAD that we should know of?
Yes, sir. There's always going to be Section 3 requirements as we go through the contracting work, as people go out and physically do work. They're going to be required to bring on people from our program to work with them. Now, it will depend on the size and scope of the project itself, but that's the goal. We always attach Section 3 to everything that we do. And let's not forget, commissioners, we also have our economic impact program that we created as an agency and you supported as a board. That also includes bringing on resident participation in addition to Section 3 opportunities.
And just a general question, and I promise I get you, Commissioner Council. To see the progress that we're making against our Section 3 and our CBE goals, is there like a document that you publish quarterly or annually or semi-annually that says, here's our targets, here are accomplishments against those targets?
No, we don't do that currently, but we can create a document similar to what we were talking about with the updated property investment that will be live. We'll figure out a way to show a table of something like that on the website, which shows our progress. Or we'll be, and in addition to giving you maybe quarterly updates as that moves forward.
Director Garrett, if I can just jump in 1 second. At the end of every year, we actually do reporting back on all district dollars as well through the R&M report. And we report back on that basis on an annual basis.
Right.
So we'll just make it quarterly.
I agree with the director. We should just make it quarterly. The director has spoken. Commissioner Council.
I heard them say something about year 65. That's 55 years ago. I don't believe DCRA is even 20 or 25 years old. With that being said, there's rules that have changed. We're in a pandemic which have changed our purview and how we're going to finance, refinance, or reignite our stock to make it give us viable of 40 more years. What we say sometime 99 to 100. With that being said, we have some historical sites. So I know planning and DCRA had put rules in what we can, how we can, if we can touch them. I would like us at Next Denmark that we will be able to identify historical sites and especially show how we're going to reignite them if we can, along with what we're doing now. I know y'all don't like it, but I would like to know square footage, what we have present to where we're going to, because you're not going to build something and put families in a cage. We have to know this. Thank you.
Commissioners, Council, understood. I just want you to know that what we're talking about with these two particular projects do not impact square footage. And we do have a couple of other projects that are coming up in the future that do impact that are impacted historically, and we'll be able to clearly discuss those with you.
Great. Before we get to the motion, I have a couple questions for you. In layman's term or laywoman's term, how would you describe the residents' response to your outreach efforts in these two properties?
I'll get started. I think it was positive, Mr. Chair. The reason being was it wasn't the first time we were talking about this. As I noted, we started this particular discussion back in August of 2019. And we told the residents as we move forward and progress, we would get back to them. And we tried to keep in touch with them throughout the year. And then we came back when we had something that was a little more solidified about what direction we actually wanted to travel in. And I think the response was appreciative because we're being as transparent as we possibly can be with what we're doing. Jose was, participating in this along with LaShawn. I don't know if LaShawn is on the line, but she's been our point person. We snatched her from HUD to try and lead us through this transformation component, especially with the resident engagement and the support of Jose, OPAC, and also PMO and OCP.
Yeah, and I would add that obviously this is a new terrain for a lot of folks. So there was a heavy lift in terms of the educational components. It's one of the reasons why we did the pre-touches and the post-touches, and immediately afterwards sent back out handwritten responses. Individual follow-up was key. The majority of the questions that residents had were about when am I moving, What will be the impact, what I'm paying in rent, and what does this mean for the overall sense of the property? So once we could reassure them on what were the that were in the presentation around what their rights were as residents, a lot of the questions then came into discussing the the fiscal relationship between DCHA, where we are and where we would be. The key part, and really the element that I was speaking to around what we've learned and what we will be continuing to use on a lot of our engagements going forward, is important. Having a resident understand who they can speak to about this, whether it be in OPP, whether it be in ORS, whether it be in PMO. The value to those one-on-one relationships is huge to make sure that we are keeping residents at peace with what we're discussing, that they understand what those conversions mean, and what does that mean for what they're spending, what they're moving into, where they'll be relocated to, and what they're coming back to. So I think that really is my summary of where a lot of those questions are coming from and what we were able to provide back to residents.
And we're giving them multiple touches, commissioners, whether it be from OPAC, Jose directly, or LaShawn, and OCP, touching them, along with PMO, dealing with them on a daily basis, answering questions. And then let's not forget, we have the ROTC team out of Housing Choice Voucher Program, which is dealing with relocation efforts. That's our soft glove approach to dealing with residents and any concerns and anxiousness or anxiety they may actually have when dealing with this process. Because as Jose said, it is new. We understand that any type of relocation, whether it's into another unit within the same building, can be difficult for people. And so what we want to do is assure them that we have their best interests at heart. So they're getting multiple touches from many people from the organization.
Thank you. I just as an aside, I think we should put up a glossary of acronyms. You guys have used about 40 today. I'm not sure, and I've been on this board for a while, and I know what all of those mean. So I'm not sure the public will know what it means either. So, but just that's an aside. So my next question is, what is the time frame for approval from HUD? I know you don't have a crystal ball, but average.
I'm going to say at least 4 months to approve this particular process. But at the same time, we'll get a notice back from them to start talking about preparing our financing plan. Remember, we had Greg Byrne come in. We had Tom Davis come in from RAD to discuss with the board about what the process would look like. And then the follow-up from the HUD field office with Byrne last week means that they're going to expedite a lot of these processes for us. So we're talking about, as Alex put up, we're talking about being able to come back to you, if not the end of this calendar year, first quarter of the calendar year, to start talking about a financing plan, with hopes of trying to close something within second quarter of 21.
Great. So what is the community engagement that continues between now and then, if any?
As Jose pointed out, we have 2 at least minimum. And I know you always get to me about what the statutory requirement is. We're going to go above and beyond the additional 2 meetings that we need to have. We're going to continue to meet with residents as much as they want to meet, and answer any questions that they want us to answer. So that was one of the reasons why we've done the individual touch, commissioners, is because there are some times when you can't have a meeting or there's difficult to have them participate. Calling them one-on-one and finding out whether or not they have any concerns or problems is the best way to negate some of that, because you always ask us exactly how did the residents receive us, what was their input. And it's very hard sometimes to gauge it. So the best way we can do it and use a metric is, hey, we've called all of our residents directly, and this is what they've said to us, so we can report back out to you that we have made those touches.
So I will probably use a different metric, but that's another conversation for another time. And so there'll be lots of community engagement until there are no unanswered questions. That's sort of one of the metrics that I use. And we have tons of people on staff that can help with that process. So the other question I have is about the financial plan that's required for as part of these RADs. That is my understanding is that gets presented to the board for approval. Can you give us a sense of timing for the development of that? And how do you envision? I know it has to come to us for approval. How do you envision, if you do, sort of socializing the plan with the board, either through the finance committee or some other means?
It's probably going to be through DevMod, Commissioner, that we're going to do that. And we're looking again to try and put the financial plan together before the end of the year. So we're probably talking about a November DevMod meeting that will probably start discussing the financing plan.
And if at that meeting, this board says, you know what, we don't like your financing plan, come back to the drawing board, or scrap it, what happens?
We're pushing into 2021. In all honesty, more than likely, and there won't be we won't have the ability to close in let's say second quarter of 21. We will probably be pushing back towards the end of the year, end of the calendar year.
So all that would mean is a delay in the actual work getting done, and obviously that's a serious concern. But there's no mechanism under which DC Housing Authority can move ahead. The board's approval of the financing plan.
I'm sorry, Neil, you cut out. Did you say there's no way for us to move forward without approval of the financing plan?
Without the board's approval of the financing plan.
Correct, because we need that additional money to shore up the buildings.
Got it. Thank you. Commissioner Slover had one last question.
And this is going back to Resolution 1901, sort of the process, because that's really where I think the board's role is involving itself in the process the way we were described it would be. So one of the things we talked about in Resolution 1901 leading up to a lot was about, I think you agreed that you would look through a lens of trying to preserve what people refer to as traditional public housing as your first attempt. And that if we were to move away from that, i.e. a RAD or some demo dispo or something else, that you would provide to the board the rationale for why you were doing it in kind of like the deal template summary. So I guess the question is, we didn't do that here. And do you see any of our properties as being able to be kept as traditional public housing based on what you're seeing today?
Yes. Again, the transformation plan itself is not one size fits all. There are properties within the portfolio that can remain and are not being identified, and I'll be straightforward with you, identified by HUD as being as deficient from a physical standpoint and also from a financial standpoint as they look at our portfolio themselves. So as I said, and we talked about it in the Ops Committee meeting, we're getting information from HUD and having to sit down with them and discuss what our plans are. So they know and have already identified various properties that they believe to be in need of repositioning, but there are other properties which do not. And we would push back on those properties that we don't feel comfortable with. Again, it's not a one size fits all, Commissioner Slover. We're going to have a myriad of a lot of things going on within our portfolio, some traditional public housing, some moving towards the RAD platform, and some moving possibly to full pledge of redevelopment if necessary. And remember, this is guided, and this is also guided, Commissioner Slover, by the ability of the physical plant of the property to be able to survive based on the per unit per month allocation from HUD. Whether it can do that on its own or whether or not it needs an influx of capital to make those significant improvements in the building so that the quality of life for residents can be improved. When you have infrastructure issues and concerns like that, we all know that our capital fund will not be able to sustain those improvements. And then we're going to continue to get residents who feel as though they're being neglected. That's not what we're trying to do. So to answer your question, it was a long way to answer it, but no, not all properties will be converted.
But I would have loved to have seen your team's thinking on why you're converting these, which is what we agreed to on Resolution 1901. I think having an issue with this process, I guess is.
I think the scope of work does it. I think the overall scope of work that we have to do, as Alex pointed out, we're putting in money from the district dollars already for one phase of scope of work, right? For judiciary as an example. And then he's identified to you today that there's still a need for another $35 million in improvements in that particular property. We can't, if we were to remain in this traditional public housing form and we draw down the traditional ACC money, you'll never be able to shore up that property. We appreciate the money and the funding that we receive from the council and the mayor because that is well needed, and we're trying to put it to the best use possible. What we do know, though, we're still going to have large gaps. And so this is an example, judiciary is an example of if it remains in public housing, even though we have an influx of capital from the district using the first tranche of money from fiscal year 2020, we're still not going to be able to solidify or give stability to that particular building. There are going to be items under the capital scope of work that are going to be untouched, and we'll be right back at square one within the matter of years.
Mr. Garrett, I hear you and I recognize that, but you started off by saying we have a $2.5 billion budget bust. And I asked you a simple question, which was which properties don't fall under the category of what you just went through. What I'm trying to get my head around is that it would appear that you're going to either RAD or demo dispo the entire portfolio. And what I wanted to do prior to that was to have you give us an analysis and an evaluation of the entire portfolio so that we knew what was coming. And the fact that you can't bring a preliminary financing plan at this point for these three projects causes me concern that I don't understand how you can't bring a financing plan right now.
Let me just correct the record, Commissioner Slover. If you refer back to our transformation plan itself set the stage for our overall process in identifying properties. That's how you arrive at the first 14 properties that we consider to be obsolete. Remember, we go back to the transformation plan as the vehicle and the catalyst for receiving money and funding from the district. In addition to moving in this particular direction with RAD, we identified the first 14 properties that were obsolete, and that was put into the transformation plan. And then you go through the transformation plan in its entirety, and you can see where the additional phases have been created. The transformation plan itself does set a foundation for the financial impact for each property within the portfolio and how we would address it. If we can go back to the transformation plan at some point in time during another discussion, probably we'll see it there.
One final point. I mean, that's why we need the updates, because the Judiciary House, the information you gave us, the only information we have from you is from 2019. It's almost 2 years old, and it's $13 million, and now you're saying it's 18. And so what we need is real-time information. You're asking us to approve something that's going to fundamentally change the makeup of these properties without the information you said you would give us. And it's a very simple thing. We said to you, Mr. Garrett, please go out and do this evaluation. We're giving you the green light to go do this, but this is what we need when we get to the decision time. And we're now at the decision time, and we don't have what you promised.
And Commissioner Slover, one thing I think
Sorry, I've really worked on not interrupting you. So I don't fundamentally have Exhibit B of 1901. And that's what you promised us. That's why I personally voted for Resolution 1901, was because I thought this is finally a time where we can get all the information we need and make decisions, as Exhibit says, guidelines for Board of Commissioners oversight and evaluation of property repositioning proposals. We don't have the information, and you're asking for the green light. So I don't understand it. So I can't support it, and I don't understand how anybody could support it, because we're not being given the information you said you would.
Thank you, Commissioner Slover. So thanks everyone for your input on these two resolutions. We'll take them separately. First, there's Resolution 2015, which would be the RAD for Kelly Miller and LeDroit Senior Apartments. I will entertain a motion to approve Resolution 2015. Is there a motion?
I move that we approve resolution
2015. Is there a second? Is there a second?
Second.
Second. Alicia, could we have a roll call?
Thank you. Commissioner Hill Jones,
Abstain.
Commissioner Strickland,
Yes.
Commissioner Forrester,
No.
Commissioner Ortiz-Gallo,
Yes.
Commissioner Falchecchio. I'm sorry, I didn't hear you, Commissioner Falchecchio.
Yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Talaferro, Neil, is Commissioner Talaferro still on your line? I don't hear a response.
I can't tell.
I'll circle back to Commissioner Talaferro. Commissioner Council,
No.
Commissioner Von Gossary,
No.
Commissioner Slover,
No.
I'll circle back to Commissioner Talaferro. Is he there? Neil, would you like for me to try to reach him? This may make a difference with the vote.
It's not here. What's the vote right now?
Okay, Commissioner Talaferro, I have you on speaker. Can you tell me if what your vote is for?
No.
Okay, your vote is no. Okay, thank you. And
Is this for 15 and 16?
this is just for 15. Chairman, thank you. Chairman Albert.
Yes.
So you have 4 yes, 5 no, and 1 abstention. The resolution is not approved.
Thank you. Resolution 2016, which is a RAD for Judiciary House Apartments. Is there a motion to approve Resolution 20-16? Is there a motion?
Motion.
Motion, is there a second?
Second.
Second, roll call.
Thank you. Commissioner Falchecchio.
Yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Neil Jones.
Abstain.
Commissioner Talaferro. I'm sorry, I'll put you back on speaker. Commissioner Talaferro.
No.
Thank you. Commissioner Ortiz-Gallo.
Yes.
Commissioner Strickland.
Yes.
Commissioner Council.
No.
Commissioner Forrester.
No.
Commissioner Slover.
No.
Commissioner Von Gossary.
No.
Chairman Albert.
Yes.
There are 4 yes, 5 no, 1 abstention. The resolution is not approved.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Let's move on to Resolution 2017, which will approve the DCHS operating budget for fiscal year 2021. Barbara?
Okay. Good afternoon, Commissioner and colleagues. According to HUD regulations, the District of Columbia Housing Authority Board is required to approve the operating budget prior to the fiscal year started. The proposed fiscal year 2021's operating budget is $560,729,433. The proposed fiscal year 2021's budget achieved the goal to reduce $2.6 million deficit, which is on track to reduce the DCHA's operating budget by deficit by fiscal year 2023. We anticipate to propose a break-even budget by fiscal year 2024. We presented the proposed the fiscal year 2021's budget at the budget symposium last Thursday. And during the budget symposium, the board requested additional information, which we provided yesterday. I'm just do you want me to go through the detail, or do you have any question or any comment?
Well, I think we need to go through as much detail as possible, not just for the Board of Commissioners, but for the public in general.
All right. So I'm going to bring the presentation we went through during the symposium. It's okay? Okay. Second.
Unless Mr. Garrett has another way in which he wants to do it.
Mr. Gary? I'm not sure. Okay.
Barbara, I prefer the short version versus the same presentation that you did in audit and finance. I think the commissioners have seen this. So, okay.
Okay, the budget. Oh, I see what you mean. Okay, just a second. Let me close this one. We are going to use this one, the budget, the fiscal year 2021's budget. We totally that we propose $554 million, $294,005 in total revenue, which including the tenant rent and the HUD payment and the administrative revenues and the DC government payments and the administrative fees we earned. Plus, the city also awarded us a $4.2 million grant for our public safety department. And we also, including in the revenue, also has the public housing operating subsidies. Overall, total of $554 million and $294,005. The total operating expenses which is our total operating budget is at $560,729,433. That we break into several categories in the employee salary and the benefit, and the utility expenses and our insurance expenses, the ease of interest expenses, and our ordinary maintenance contract and the materials. And another category is our administrative and general expenses. The final is our HUD payments for our federal and local programs. Total of the operating expenses, our operating budget is at $560,729,433, which the result of our 2021's budget is at the $6,435,428 deficit, compared to our fiscal year 2020's operating budget deficit was $9,056,640, which is so for fiscal year 2021, our operating deficit, we have a reduction of $2.6 million. Any questions of any items?
No, so commissioners, if you have questions on the budget, please indicate before we vote on it.
And we went through all this detail and during the symposium and the finance committee meeting.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Barbara.
No.
Hearing no questions.
I have some questions. I'm sorry. That was quick.
Go ahead, Bill.
Okay, so I appreciate the report there. Was this loaded into our thing, or is this the first time we're seeing this one on the board here?
I'm sorry, what did you, this is based on, this is the request additional information during the budget symposium that you asked. So you asked for the past 2 years?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. All right. So couple questions. So, and I don't know who will answer these, but in looking at the salaries from 2019, 2020, and 2021, salary and benefits, looks like we're hovering at about 76 million. Is that a standard number for an agency of our size and our scope?
We, based on what I know, is that it's a little bit higher than other agencies because most of the other housing authority doesn't have a public safety police department.
Okay. And looking at the HAP payments, over watching the trend from 2019 to 2020 to 21, it looks like they went from 230 down to 222, 230 million in 2019 and 232 million in 2021. But when you look down to the expense line, the number's different. And so in 2019, it looks like we only spent 200 million. So there's a $30 million differential. And in 2021, it looks like there's a $5 million differential between what we take in and what we're putting out. What's that money going towards?
The money, the difference, the change, the variance in the revenue side, what you just, in 2019, because of the previous, it was at a higher appropriation rate, and when HUD first funded us, our funding is always based on calendar year. So for the first, at the beginning of the year, is always at the lower end, then we always have to settle with HUD every 6 months. So the fiscal year 2019, because we had the 2 settlements with HUD to reconcile the revenue. So we recognize our revenue is based on the funding we receive. It's not. It's based on the time that HUD released our funding. Let me put it this way. So because 2019 the appropriation rate was a little bit higher, 100%, a little bit over 100%. So it changed on year to year based on the timing, based on the appropriation rate.
So I might hear from you that if we take in $230 million in HAP payments, we're paying out $230 million in rent?
And as an MTW agency, if you recall in our budget symposium, that HUD and our MTW initiative activities that we HUD approved for DCHA to transfer to up to 10% of management fee to cover COCC expenses. And we also, if you look at, we also have a need. Our public housing has been historically, we always have to transfer funding from the this is considered MTW block grant. So we have to use MTW block grant to cover our public housing low income properties deficit. That's one of the reasons that we, in the past, we on average, we probably transfer about $15 million from the public, from the MTW block grant transferred over to cover the public housing operation, the deficit.
Okay, so that number's gone down drastically. So is that because the voucher costs are more? So the voucher costs seem to have gone up about 25% in the last 4 years?
More than that.
So is that what's eating into this number here?
That's because the increase in our HUD payments, so either those funds available for us to transfer from the MTW block grant to fund the public housing operating expenses. Yes, because.
Okay. So thank you. So moving on to the PHA operating grants. What is the $63,844,000? What is that number based off of? Like, where does that come from? Is that a specific number of units that get funded, or is it just a number that we then spread out over units? How does it come to the authority?
It's a formula. It's a calculation. It's a HUD that they call it the operating subsidy calculations. We have to submit it every calendar year based on our occupied unit, and the HUD determined this PEL, UEL, the rate that they will fund the DCHA. That's the calculation, the formula we have to apply. We have to submit it to HUD every year. This year it's a little bit higher because if you recall that I reported to you that we have a $2.2 million from the Award the CARE Act, which we are it's included in this $63 million, which is going to fund the CARE Act, COVID-19 related expenses for our first quarter of next fiscal year 2021. But that's a formula. Other than the $2.2 million, that's a formula that we have to submit it to HUD, and we have to calculate every year, and HUD has approved it.
So what's the number you use what number do you submit to HUD to get to the 60?
It's different every year, and we have been.
What was the number you used this year? In other words, how many traditional public housing units did you submit this year?
This one, including our mixed finance property, they were also ACC units. So agency-wide, we submit a little bit over 7,000 public housing units, but DCHA manager is about 6,000. I have to look at my number, but a little bit overall, including the mixed finance, we submitted over 7,000 public housing ACC units. This is for all. I'm sorry?
Seems like the number would be bigger on a per month allocation than what Mr. Garrett gave us earlier in the RAD demonstration. In other words, the number seems like it's a lot bigger.
No, the number on the red for the red funding, that including the operating subsidies plus the capital fund. We also, every public housing ACC unit, we also receive a fund every year. We receive a funding for capital improvement, for capital expenses. So the change, for the red conversion, that HUD is going to, basically HUD is transfer the public housing funding to voucher programs. That's it. So the public housing funding, every ACC unit, okay, HUD fund operating subsidies and the capital expenses. So that's why it's a little bit higher, yes.
We converted to an MTW. They didn't fix the number of public housing units we get at a certain number and then fund it based on that fixed number. Is that not accurate?
No, that's not public housing. That I think that you are talking about section HCVP. Yes, HCVP is the number of units we fund is a fixed. Okay, but public housing is based on our occupied unit.
So it's occupied. Okay.
Yes, change every year.
In doing that math, it just doesn't seem like it comes out to the low number that we're talking about per unit per month. It comes out to $760 or something versus the 400 and some that you're advertising. So.
The $700, not including the capital expenses. On average, we probably I have to look on average. DCHA receive about around $150 to $200 per unit per month for our public housing capital expenses. So the one for red, that's including the capital expense, the capital fund revenue. This one only have an operating subsidy. This one doesn't including a capital fund. The capital fund is the $21 million is another the capital fund programs.
Okay, I appreciate that. So moving on to the capital budget.
Okay.
Where does the $21.260 million, where does that come from?
Where is it? What?
The capital budget that we approved as part of the MTW, which was 21.260.
Oh.
I'm wondering where that number comes from, because in the budget summary you have CFP as 3.7 million.
That's the one we transferred. That remember that every year that's for the pay for the OCP, the administrative fee from the capital fund program. That's operating expenses. The remaining amount is for capital expenses, which is this budget is for operating budget. with this budget is not, do not include the capital expenses. So the $21 million is what was awarded to DCHA, again, based on a formula for calendar year 2020.
Okay.
Okay.
So the CARES Act, I see one reference to it at 2.2 million.
Yes.
What was the total amount of money you got from CARES money, and where is the rest of it reflected in the budget?
The CARES money that we receive a total for public housing is for us to spend the charge the money since total of public housing $9.1 million. That we pretty much evenly spend about around $1 million every month. So that we have about $2.2 million remaining that for the need in the calendar in the first quarter of fiscal year 2021. So the 2.2 is included here.
Where is it reflected in the budget, I guess is my question.
It's in the PHA operating grant. That's the $63 million we were talking about earlier.
Okay, but you said there's 9.1 million. Where's
The 9.7 about 8 no, that's what about $6.8 million is we spend this year already. For this fiscal year, we will spend about $6 million from the $9 million by end of this fiscal year 2020. We already spent that.
Okay.
Mr. Gary, the solution center, the Mr. Gary standing for this meeting, that's paid out from the CARES Act.
Okay, I'd love to see it broken out specifically in the budget because it's
a reimbursable. We have to submit and to draw down the money. So it's based on how we spend money. And this, like you all know that we doing the teleworking, that we provide the employee cell phone and laptop. And we also had to purchase additional software to make it happen. So we spend a big chunk of money on the technology.
Commissioner, in terms of CARE spending so far, we've expended costs on computers, additional software to support our telework program, additional cell phones for employees. We also, similar to the district, provided a $14 per day per diem to all of our essential employees. There were some costs at the beginning of remote work that resulted in overtime. We also spent significant dollars investing in the various partnerships with DW, with Howard University, with United Healthcare. Of course, we also invested in technology like Wobot and Emoca and SafePass to ensure that those employees who are actually physically coming to work and any customers that we will begin receiving as part of the return to work process, we can properly manage and document those who may be symptomatic and help us in managing and minimizing infection within the workforce. And of course, we also spend significant dollars on PPE supplies, as well as deep cleaning our buildings, especially when we know that there has been some type of positive test or exposure to our employees, and in some cases to our residents. And we can provide you with a breakdown of those costs. Those are some of the things that we spent on so far.
Please don't take that the wrong way. What I'm saying is I just like to see it reflected in the budget. I'm sure it's being spent very wisely. It just would like to see it reflected in the budget. So the final question I would have would be, in 2020, I think the board approved a transfer of money of $23.8 million from the reserves.
Yes, you can see from the bottom here, that we asked the board approval to transfer $9.1 million for the operating deficit and the relocation, the family about payment for those family relocated from the public housing property due to the lead issues. And we also asked the board approval to transfer $14.8 million to address the lead issues. Okay, so the total last year, yes, we did. If you look at this two numbers, $9.9 million and $56,640. Plus the $14,803,725. That's what we asked the board last year.
Right. So was that your question?
No, my question is, did the money get transferred? Because I don't see it reflected in the 2020 budget that you updated, which is only 9 million.
Well, when we transfer, we don't transfer all at once. We transfer as a need basis. So if you look at, just a second, let me do one thing. So hold on a second.
But this, I think it's a simple yes or no answer.
Yes, we still transfer money, but not, this is, if you can see that this is as July, we already transferred the $7.5 million to cover the deficit. We also
I think Bill was asking about 2.3 million. I can't remember the number you're asking, Bill.
I'm sorry.
I may be asking too many questions in a row, but let me get to the real question, which is, how is our reserve continue to remain at $60 to $65 million when we draw down these large numbers year after year? How is it managed?
The 63 was after we closed the book in 19. This year, basically right now, yes, we draw down this much money, but this year, because of COVID-19's funding to help, we actually didn't have that deficit because help us to cover, because COVID-19 also allow us to pay for the employee salary, and that, like those employee, we build a solution center.
So Barbara, can I, if I can just try to make it simple for everyone, because there are a number of people in the queue with questions. What was our reserves at the beginning of this fiscal year, or the end of fiscal year 2019? Just off the top.
This fiscal year is a little bit over 63.
And what would be our reserves at the end of this fiscal year?
At the end of this fiscal year, we anticipate about $2.5 to $3 million deficit.
No, I was talking about our reserves.
So it will be about $60 million.
So we would have expended about $3 million, plus or minus, in the fiscal year from the reserves, correct?
Correct.
And we anticipate spending how much next year?
$6.4 million. This is what we asked. That's the deficit, $6.4 million.
But that's on top
But
of
that's not,
23. So that's on top of the 23 from last year. So it's almost $30 million in 2 years.
Last year, 23, we asked your approval, but we didn't spend that money. If you look at we asked the $14.8 million for the interim control, but so far we only spent $2.6 million.
But if you already have the money, why do you need the extra 6? I guess is what I'm saying. I guess it's confusing to me to see all this. Does that make sense?
I'm sorry, what do you mean?
Barbara, I think you incorrectly referenced 6.4 million coming from the reserve. That is not the case, correct?
It's 2.8.
Wait a second. Fiscal year 2020, we are going to have a net deficit close to about $3 million. So we are going to use the reserve to cover the $3 million deficit for fiscal year 2020. So our deficit is going to, by end of fiscal year 2020, our deficit is going to be close to $60 to $61 million. Fiscal year 2021, our proposal is that we are going to have a deficit of $6.4 million, which is we have to use the reserve.
Again, just for clarification, so last year, you asked the board for authorization to use up to $1 million in reserves, yes or no?
Yes.
And you're only using about $3 million.
Yes, yes, that's correct.
This year, you're asking the board to use $6.4 million in reserves?
Yes.
Right. Thank you.
But I want to clarify. I'm sorry, but in the 2020 budget that we passed, there was a $23 million request for transfer from reserves.
Commissioner, if you look at here, basically that I'm going to use this one. I hope the interim control that we asked the board to approval to transfer $14.8 million. That was at that time based on the projection. We would spend $14.8 million in fiscal year 2020. But so far, 10 months of operation, we only spent $2.6 million, which that means that we only need, which we did spend what we projected at the beginning. So when And when we transfer the money, it's not, we only transfer the money from our reserve based on the need.
But
Got
what you're saying is you won't need that money. Like you're not
Yes.
you're not going to need the 12. You
So only need 2.6, yes.
to do the $14 million worth of work you thought you had to do, you only need 2.6.
Yes.
Because one thing I would like to add, Commissioner Slover, we've been going over those numbers because we had meetings with HUD in reference to what we were using for our lead abatement plan. And they wanted us to go back and narrow down the scope, if at all possible, based on their guidelines. What they stated to us that our effort in identifying approximately $14 million worth of work was, I don't want to call it overzealous, but we had gone to and tried to go above and beyond what they actually felt was required. That being said, we have gone back and started to look and revise some of the scopes to bring down the number to ensure that we do provide the quality and safety for the residents, but are able to preserve some dollars.
Great. We do have some additional questions from commissioners. Thank you, Commissioner Slover. Commissioner Von Gosry.
My questions are very simple and very quick. Number one, are we broke? Number two, will any of our employees be laid off? And how have COVID-19 impact the budget?
No, Commissioner, we aren't broke. At this time, no, Commissioner, we're not doing any furloughs or layoffs. And I'll let Barbara answer the last question.
We still have the required, the recommended 2 months operating funding. So we still have that maintain the 2 months, the operating expenses. Means that if we don't get anything, including HUD payment, that yes, the operating we can survive without no funding, no revenue at all for 2 months. So and we know that's not going to happen. Okay, and the COVID, yes, it does help DCHA a lot, especially in this fiscal year 2020, because it helps us to pay for some of our employee payroll, those employees, and do all the renovations, and help us to purchase make the improvement, purchase the new the technology like the laptop, all those software that for us to improve the efficiency of our operations. So
Thank you, Barbara. And one thing I would like to note, Commissioners, prior to 2017, October 2017, I believe that the budget was being plugged more graciously with reserve money than possibly anybody was made aware of.
No, we appreciate that. That's why we were so deliberate about limiting the ability to draw from the reserves last year. So thank you, Commissioner Von Gosry. Commissioner Council?
Any other questions?
I think Commissioner Council has a question or questions. Commissioner Council? Oh, he was just here.
Trying to get off mute, I'm sorry. And Barbara, line item 22, which is the salaries and the benefits, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Looking at it from 19 to 2020, within who we have hired, who we have terminated, who have taken the early out, and who have retired. With all of those 4 categories I'm talking about.
Okay.
How much of a savings do we have? Because there's slots for people that have retired or have terminated or have taken the early out.
Okay.
How much of a savings do we have? Because I'm looking at the amount of salaries, it's gotten higher instead of gone down.
Okay.
And there were some positions we did not refill.
Commissioner, this year for the fiscal year 2021, the increase is mainly because of because of need to hire 12 additional police officers. That over the past few years, that basically every year we give an employee a rate in COLA adjustment, the COLA, the rate increase. So if you look at the dollar budget amount, actually that has been consistent. Down here, you can see that it's not increased at all. Means that all the saving is kind of offset by the rate, by the employee setting the rate increase. So every year we do give an employee a COLA adjustment, the rate increase. So about how many new hire the retired we have to get back to you later. I don't have that number on top of my head. But if you look at here, we have been maintained our salary and benefit expenses. This year, 2021, the increase is purely just because of the 12 new police officer positions, which is based on request. We need to do that. Otherwise, you can see that our salary benefit, even every year we provide the employee the increase, it's not increase our overall expenses. So it means that we do provide create some saving.
Mhm.
It's just the saving is offset by the rate increase.
Commissioner Council, just to supplement Barbara's response, and for context, within our pay system, there lies natural step increases. So workforce budget will increase from year to year. For the VSIP in 2019, we had 38 employees who took the VSIP. And of those 38,
What's VSIP?
that's the Voluntary Separation Incentive Program. It's like an early retirement incentive program. There were 38, and of the 38, I think we did not fill about 15 of those positions. So we did realize savings. What was projected in the discussion last year was about a $1.1 million saving over a 3 to 5 year period. Because as you imagine, the whole idea is employees who've been here and have longer tenure and who make a larger salary would take the incentive, and the goal was to backfill at the lower end of the pay schedule. In addition to that, in terms of employee costs and the impact expected here, in Mr. Gear's performance report, he referenced taking over 5 properties that had been previously managed by a private contractor. With that, we added a couple positions to the payroll, but we also saw offset in management costs. And then, as Barbara said, this year the budget reflects an increase in 12 positions for our public safety department to address some of the issues that's been identified there. So over time, yes, there is a change, but with workforce costs, it's not the number of employees on payroll. There are a number of factors that goes into what that number ultimately looks like.
I want to point out, like this ordinary maintenance on the operation, that's our maintenance contract. We from the 19 compared to now, we reduced because we did convert, we did the structure, we have built our own team. We hire our own employee to do the work, like the pest control, if you recall it. So we do the change of the structure. So you can see that we do create some saving from our maintenance contract expenses. So look at all the different type, different category of expenses. They are all related.
Thank you.
Any questions?
Yeah, John has some questions.
Sure.
I typed them in the chat. Just what's the proposed COLA in FY 2021?
There is no COLA proposed in the FY 2021 budget. The only increase projected are natural step increases that's built into the compensation plan, which is similar to the district's.
Okay. And can someone explain again why we authorized $14 million but only used $2 million in that other reserve?
Commissioner, that was the original dollar amount that we had identified as being the cost for the lead abatement or interim controls. Those were the initial scopes of work that we had outlined.
So did we not complete the scope of work? Did the scope of work?
No, we're still going through the scope of work now. We're still no. We completed the original scope of work. We've gone back and revised some of the scopes of work, and we're actually completing projects as we speak, where we can.
So, but to both John and Bill's questions, if we anticipated $14 million worth of work in 2020, and we only spent $2 million, does it mean that $12 million did not get done?
No, that's not necessarily, Commissioner. And also, we have to take into consideration that that was just.
If it's not, so explain the difference.
Let me. The question would be, will it get spent? I guess that's the question.
And I want to. So that's another question.
Yeah.
Commissioner, I want to add
Wait,
this.
I think Director Garrett was answering Barbara, so I'm going to allow him to answer.
I'm trying to couch your question so I can give you the appropriate response. One other piece to the puzzle, Commissioners, is remember we're talking about interim controls versus actual abatement. So the $14 million as allocated was going towards interim controls. That's a temporary fix. Now that HUD has put us into the lead abatement plan, some of that money may have to be spent for full abatement, in which means we don't have to go back on an annual basis to make any repairs.
But my understanding of how a budget is developed, and I haven't developed one in a long time, is that you come and you ask for funds for a fiscal year. And so your $14 million request was based on some scope that said it's going to get done within the year, right? So I'm just really trying to understand what happened that only $2 of that $14 million got spent. And to Commissioner Slover's question, if it didn't get spent in 2020, when will it get expended?
It should be expended over the next 3 years, sir.
So what line item is it sitting in?
The money is sitting in DCHS reserve. Not on here. It's in our DCHS reserve in our balance sheet account.
Chairman.
So
when we sat down and reviewed the work with HUD, we went from a $14 million scope of work to a X amount of scope of work. What was the X amount?
I'm referring to, I'm going to allow Central or Alex because they were working on this. Also, John Stringfield, who I don't think is on the line with us, Commissioner, is the lead for the LXP program. So if I can't get John on the line with the number right now, I'll have to give you the final dollar amount that we've scoped out thus far.
I'm sorry, I've been working offline. Could someone catch me up with what the
No,
question
Alex,
is?
we're just looking for the lead abatements scope. We went from $14 million as being the scope, and now we only spent about $2.5 million for that scope. Do we believe that the remaining $12 million will be utilized for lead interim controls? I also noted that if it's not used for lead interim controls, that it will be used for actual lead abatement, full abatement, based on the approved lead abatement plan by HUD.
Yeah, I'll take that. So we are finding that from the initial analysis that was done, which was very conservative, if we saw one or two components that were tested hot for lead, we made the assumption, this is back a year and a half, 2 years ago, that every component of a like nature would also be hot. That has not proved to be the case during the interim controls work, and so the $2 million spent versus the 14 budgeted is an accurate depiction of how those budgets have come down. I think, Director Garrett, you're correct that if we were to want to pivot here, rather than doing interim controls, which is a yearly thing where you have to recertify and retest, you're always exposed to a potential risk. We should pivot and put that money into abatement, which we've already started to do. We've already developed some strategies for that. So it's not going to be $2 million going forward, but it might not be 12 either. I think it'd be more like maybe 6, just based on what we're seeing. I hope that helps.
And how long will it take to get that work done, the abatement work?
We're targeting nine public housing projects that were the largest of our risk in fiscal year 2021, and I'm working with several people in the property management operations department right now. I and others, including John Springfield, are working with them to develop a scope and schedule for that work. That was actually part of our 50 million presentation that we were going to be doing, was talking about how we're going to use the money, and maybe that lead abatement was part of that plan. I don't want to telegraph too much information, but.
Well, if it's part of that, then we wouldn't need this draw from the reserves. If it's part of the $50 million plan, we wouldn't need this draw from the reserves.
I'll put it this way. I would prefer to use the money that we have for capital as opposed to using reserves for that. And I think I don't think I'm speaking out of line by saying that.
And Commissioner Falchecchio, the idea would be that the scope of work that we will be engaging in would also encompass an actual abatement. So if we were replacing a ceiling where there might be something that is that has lead, or we were doing a wall that has lead, by removing the wall or doing the rehabilitation, that automatically would abate the problem.
And I don't know if Commissioner Slover wants to associate himself with this comment, but you know, the funding source is very important, but more important is that the work that we know needs to get done is getting done. So
Yeah, I know.
That's what that's what I'm driving at here.
Yes.
How the work is done.
Well, I don't want to interrupt you, but it's a twofold thing. Yes, if we thought we needed $14 million worth of remediation, we only did 2, then that's a concern. But from a budget perspective, it's unclear what's happening to the 12 million that wasn't spent. Whether it's, at one point I thought it was not going to get spent. Now I'm hearing that it's going to get spent no matter what. So really, the draw from the budgets, the reserves is going to be 23 million from last year.
Too sloppy.
Right? And then another 6 million, so that's almost 30 million in 2 years. So I'm confused about the reserves and the numbers. So there's 2 things. Yes, I want to make sure the work gets done, but B, I'm lost. I'm confused on the numbers, and it's confusing.
And so, Bill, every time you say the word confusing, you confuse me more. So, and I was confused before you used the word confused. So, and it's the same question. I still don't know how I got from 14 to 2. The only way I know to get from 14 to 2 is to reduce the scope of work, right? Or delay or push it out. And so I haven't gotten clarity on that. And if we are, and I also have some concerns about the analysis that went into coming up with the $14 million controls plan, and whether or not that was the same analysis that informed our requests to the city for capital dollars for FY 2021.
Let me add some more.
It wasn't.
No, they're not related, Neil, at all.
Before you get into that, Neil, the budget we passed in 2020 shows a total expense of $537 million. And that was balanced with a $23 million transfer from reserves. I'm holding this in my hand. This is what I pulled it off of our studies. But in the budget report that we got, we're only showing total expenses of $522 million for 2020. So the money that we're talking about, the 12 million, seems to disappear because it wasn't spent. But it's not being reflected later. So it's kind of lost in the shuffle.
I believe that Commissioner, you had the original proposed budget. We originally proposed $11 million deficit, then based on the commissioner request, we identified $2.3 million savings. So I have to look at what you have. So
I'm just going off what the signed resolution was. Either way, it's confusing as to what's happening to that $12 million and where it's reflected in future budgets, and how we still have 2 months of reserves if our spend is $560 million and 2 months of reserves is almost $90 million, right?
Our average, the one thing that we didn't include in our reserve is the cities, the local cities, the have payment, because that's a reimbursable expenses. So it's from the DC government, the HUD payment. If you look at this is the 189. We are not.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I see that. Thank you.
This is the reimbursable expenses. So we submitted to the city. So this is not the required that we need to maintain the reserve. This is the big one. So if you took the money out, this amount out, yes, we still have a 2 months.
All right.
Okay.
I'm still confused.
Chairman Albert.
Yeah.
This is Commissioner Strickland. Can I ask a question to the executive director? If we don't pass this today, what's going to happen?
We won't have a budget to work with for the fiscal year.
But if we go back and fix it and call a special meeting to pass it before the end of September.
Yep. That's what I
But there's, I think
recommend.
Barbara is trying to identify exactly what they're.
We did it last year and the year before, I think. So.
Not a problem. I think, yeah, again, as I said, in previous years, commissioners, unbeknownst to you, they were plugging. And
So
we're not doing that now.
Is it possible to withdraw this resolution and revisit it in a week?
Alex, can I ask that you? Sorry, Alex. Can I ask that you reiterate the point about the savings that was made between the interim controls versus the path that we're going down now?
Well, sure, but
And Alex, before you do that, I just want to remind the board that we did have a lead abatement briefing where we talked about our engagement with HUD and the fact that we needed to go back and start looking at some of our scopes because HUD felt as though we had budgeted a little bit too much for the interim control process. So I remember we did brief out the board on doing a lead abatement update previously. So go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, and I just want to preface my remarks by saying that, I'm not directly involved in the interim controls work, so I'm only going based on what I've heard and seen from the team.
Alex, I'll jump in. This is John Stringfield. So just to let everyone know.
Myself in trouble.
Yeah, so I wouldn't go that far, Alex. But what happened was we had a budget for interim controls, and to just give you on a very specific level, say for example, we have window units or window panes where the entire window was designated as hot or containing lead initially by our initial HUD reports. Our secondary lead reports let us know that it was not the entire window unit, but only a portion of the window unit that would need to be treated. And so that's an example of how a reduction was made from the 12 to 2 million. And granted, there are tons of windows that we're talking about or other particular items that were considered hot, but that's an example of how we went from 12 to $2 million.
Well, can you guys lay that out someplace for us?
I'm sorry?
Can you lay that out someplace for us so we can understand how we get that big jump?
Yes.
John, did you have another question?
Who's speaking? Who just spoke?
John Stringfield from the Office of Capital Planning, I think it's what it's called. John Falchecchio, did you have a question?
Just what is the fund balance that was alluded to? What's the actual fund balance in the reserve?
I think Barbara said it will, at the end of this fiscal year, it'll be about 61 million.
Yes. We projected by end of fiscal year.
Yeah. So besides Mike needing clarification on the $12 million delta, what other clarification do board members seek at this time? if any, before we can proceed with this budget.
Say that again, because I didn't hear you.
I just want to know what else needs to be clarified before we vote on this budget.
Chair, can I, that the $14 million was 2020's budget. We are voting on 2021's budget now.
Right. No, but that's a good clarification. Thank you so much. But I still think I need answers to what happened to the $14 million, how come we went from 14 to 2, the rationale behind it. I know it doesn't affect the 21 budget as such, but it can set a precedent for the 2021 budget. And so I know there's a committee of budget and finance that looks at the budget with some regularity. I would like to suggest or flag that we try to at least get answers to the reserve question, the interim control dollar spent questions at that next meeting.
And then I think this Commissioner Silver, I think it's also worth, I know there was a lot of information provided, breaking out some of the stuff in more detail. I think there'll be some more questions that evolve from that as well, about the budget, because there's a lot more information in there about where all the money's going and how it's being spent. Yeah, I think there's a lot of questions. But the reserves is a really critical question we've been asking for a long time, and so I think we just need final clarity on that.
Yeah, and I would suggest, and I don't know who chairs the Finance and Audit Committee. Commissioner Council, I would suggest at the next committee meeting that we invite all of the board members. Hopefully everyone can make it, so we can get a really good understanding of the reserves and how it's working. But I don't want to seem selfish here. I'll also get an answer to the question that myself, Slover, and Falchuk have been asking about this $14 million.
Duly noted, but I have to put this on record. I'm not happy, and I don't like doing sloppy work, and that's the best word that I can call it. What I prefer to do is to pull it. In less than 2 weeks, we get this right, and we come back in and make this right. This is money. It's too ambiguous.
I'm sorry, Commissioner Council. I believe the budget is actually correct. I think what is in question is how we spent the $14 million in reference to the last year's budget in reference to the interim controls. It does not affect this year's budget. That's what we're talking about. So what we produced, the document that we produced, the budget that we produced is correct based on everything that we've given you and the transparency that we've offered. Everything is there for you to review.
Chairman?
Yes.
But do we have a spend plan for the $50 million in capital?
Commissioner Falchuk, that's what we were talking about. We were going to start talking about that later in the month of Devon. We were going to start talking about how we were going to move forward the new scope of work for the properties based on the transformation plan, and how we were doing basically a quarter turn to address some of the issues that we heard from stakeholders and from the public. So yes, we do and have developed a spend plan for the $50 million already. We just wanted the opportunity to talk about that with you in Devon as we start to push it out.
Yeah.
And John, I committed at the beginning of this board meeting that we will at least have some forums for residents' input into the spend plan. And so we have to factor that in to the equation. So, and I'm sure the executive director will work on that.
But it was alluded to earlier, Chairman, that there was work that needed to be done that was supposed to be done in 20 that might not have been done or had to be done. And maybe it's not going to be interim controls, but it's going to be a full abatement. And so that relates to the $50 million. So I don't see how they're separate.
The separation between the $50 million, because some of the work that we might deal with might take the interim controls off the table, and we won't have to do interim controls because of the actual physical rehabilitation that we might do at a particular site. Where we would have been going into that particular location and doing interim controls over and over and over again, because of the rehabilitation effort, we might be able to avert that and just do one major capital improvement versus an interim control. So that means that money stays in place and we've not only corrected. Commissioner Falchecchio, I'm not an engineer. I'm lawyer by trade, so to speak. By education, by education. That's what I'm regretting that now. What I'm trying to say to you is, if there is a wall that is up and we have to get to the pipe behind it, we take down that particular wall. When we put it back up, we have actually abated any lead issue that might have been there because we've done an actual rehabilitation effort through using capital dollars versus taking any money we set aside for interim controls. So that's how we would be used. That's why the $50 million may actually cut down the cost of using capital dollars or the reserve money for interim controls because of the actual capital improvement or repair that we're actually going to make. I think, Alex, am I on point with that by saying a pipe behind a wall we may be get to, and that actually covers us because now we have not only done the capital improvement, but we also are able to do the actual abatement of that particular wall that had some type of lead or some type of issue with it.
You're correct. I think what we want to do in order to put the agency in the best risk profile going forward, we want to attack these lead issues as abatement, not as interim controls to the greatest extent possible. That doesn't mean in every case we'll be able to do that. If we can't find the money to do a full gut rehab of a building and the abatement is off the table, then we may have to consider interim controls in some instances. But abatement is a permanent fix. That's something where you've either encapsulated to the level where it's no longer a risk or you've removed the offending material. That's what we want to do. We don't want to do interim controls because interim controls requires annual testing and we remain at risk in the future if that condition's ever exposed again.
And
So,
I appreciate that policy decision in that direction. But what I'm more concerned about is that we're passing a budget, but we're not accounting for $50 million that is supposed to be spent in that fiscal year. So
no, but that doesn't fall into we're only dealing with the budget as it exists. We don't put that $50 million into the budget that is being presented to the board.
But at the same time, you're telling us that it's interchangeable in terms of whether we do certain work out of the budget that's before us or that it happens in the $50 million.
Well, but we consider the $50 million to be a set. Now I don't want to call it a set aside, but it's a different budget line, Commissioner. So that's why we look at it that way.
Where would it be? Where would it be? John, I want to get to I think you have a great point here. Where would it be reflected?
Got it. Understood, Commissioners. Barbara, could you just?
But before you answer it, because we've had 24.9 and 14.9 already come in that is in and has been allocated. And where is that in the budget?
That's capital expenses, so they are not in the operating budget.
Exactly. It doesn't. Capital money doesn't go into the operating budget. And what you have before you, Commissioners, is the operating budget, not the capital.
Where's the capital budget?
Capital budget you approved, and remember, Commissioner Slover, you approved the capital budget with the MTW plan back in July.
Okay, so that was what I was trying to ask Barbara earlier. Was where did the $21.6 million in the capital budget come from?
Yeah, it was July when you passed the MTW plan. That also included the capital budget.
Right. So the $21.6 million we put in the capital budget, the MTW plan, that's the money from the city?
That's from HUD. That's the DCHA Capital Fund Program. The funding is received from HUD.
So where's the 14.9 and the 24.9 we already got from the city prior to the 50? Where is that? Where do we find that?
I believe that OCP they proposed they proposed all the capital expenses budget.
I can't. So this is Alex again. I don't know how we characterize it from an accounting standpoint because I'm not an accountant. I won't try to answer that question. But the way the money is allocated is we send a signed contract to the office of the CFO for approval, and then the money gets drawn down as the contracts get reviewed and approved. So we write a contract for a piece of work, of capital work. We send it to them. They review it. I think they spend either 5 or 10 days reviewing it, and then the money gets released. That's how it works. And if the contract's $1 million or higher, it goes to the DC Council for an additional passive review.
So
I,
it's on-
I appreciate that.
now.
So it never is in our books until we ask for it with a contract. We don't have it at the beginning of the year.
So it's not part of our capital fund then. It's not part of the capital fund that we approved in the moving to work plan.
No, it would not be.
But that's what Mr. Garrett just said. It was part.
It's capital money. It's not part of the capital money we get from HUD, which is part of our capital budget that we publish in the MTW plan. It's an additional allocation of district dollars, and that district dollars doesn't come in one big chunk. It comes in as we sign contracts and submit them for
As a
reimbursement.
board member, where would I see that money hitting DCHA's books? And then how would I?
That's a good question, and I don't have the answer for that. Perhaps Barbara could.
Barbara, please explain it to him. And I saw Commissioner Falcecchio's note. Commissioner Falcecchio, the MTW plan encompasses the capital budget, which has a different timing than the operating budget. So that's why they're presented separately and not together.
So commissioners, let me make
Chairman, we're talking
to earlier. Go ahead. Who was that? John, was that you?
Sorry, it's John. No,
Go
it's
ahead.
Johnny.
Johnny, go ahead.
What I don't understand is why we have to flip back to our July meeting in order to see a budget that works together. A capital budget and an operating budget work together. And in this case, in this $14 million, we see that there's a discussion about where it shifts in the operating budget, where we see it here, or in the capital budget, where the work gets done. And even if we have approved it, why it's not presented to us as one budget so that we can actually see what the agency will be spending as a whole in FY 2021.
Commissioner, the $14 million for the interim control is not considered as capital expenses.
Barbara, we appreciate that statement. So let's do this. There's just too many unanswered questions for us to move this resolution forward. What I'd like to suggest, commissioners, is that we meet next week so we can take a look at the capital budget, operating budget. We can get the questions answered on the reserve. There are too many outstanding questions on the reserve that I don't know if we spend the rest of the evening we'll be able to answer right now. And in fairness to the director and his team, they've heard a number of the questions so that they can go and prepare to respond to them. But unless there is a strong objection to my suggestion, I'd like to table this resolution.
Chairman, can we also have a sense of where the $50 million will be allocated as well? Because I think that's not either an operating or capital. It's a separate. So whatever the spend plan is for that, we need to understand that as well.
Yes.
Yes, and we've been working on that, and we were prepared to make a presentation at a date soon. I think we just decided it was DevMod.
Correct. That's when we're planning on presenting it.
Okay.
That's great. So I think you'd be able to probably do a dry run at DevMod, and then for the larger group meeting, also present it.
That'd be fine.
Great. I hear no objections from any of the commissioners. Commissioner Council, your suggestion is carried. Let's move on to hopefully something less controversial. Resolution 20-18. I see Ken smiling as I say that, which would approve the purchase and renewal of DCHA insurance policies with the Housing Authority Risk Retention Group and other providers. And so I'm going to turn it over to Mary Grace to walk us through this.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. I am Mary Grace Falwell, an attorney in the Office of General Counsel, and before you for your review and approval is Resolution 2018 to approve the purchase and renewal of DCHA insurance policies with the Housing Authority Risk Retention Group and other providers. As you know, we come to the board each year at this time to approve the purchase of insurance coverage for the Housing Authority for the next fiscal year. There are certain requirements for insurance coverage in the annual contributions contract and HUD guidance. But given sort of the large, complex operations of a housing authority like DCHA and the particular risks that we face, there are certain types of additional coverage that we've decided are prudent for the operation of our housing authority. There's a general commercial liability covers, generally protects DCHA from being sued, and it covers many different types of coverage, including directors and officers, which protects you, the commissioners, from being sued, acts done in your official capacity. It also includes employment liability. Other types of coverage that we purchase would include auto liability. We also purchase property coverage, which covers the replacement cost of our buildings. And then the other types of coverage and the associated estimated premiums are included in the board resolution. We will get final numbers. We're getting some numbers that are closer to final now, and the numbers are coming in close to our estimated numbers in the board resolution. We did estimate some increase in the premiums. Usually there's a 3 to 5% increase just as part of inflation. This year, due to COVID, what our insurer is seeing across the nation is actually an increase in directors and officers, and also employment coverage. And that's just where the coverage is going up at this time.
Thanks. Are there any questions? Don't be shy, guys.
One quick question, sorry.
Yes.
Or over here, but so the total amount is 3.395. That's the estimate.
That's the estimate.
Could we in the future total that up in the resolution? A bunch of different numbers. So that's basically a 10% increase.
Yes, from the 2020. Yes.
And
That's
so
approximately, that's right.
That's being suggested that it's a COVID thing, or did we have more claims this year, or was there anything that drove that 10% increase?
We're also looking to add some additional coverage if we deem it's appropriate. One type of coverage is for HQS inspectors who do visual inspections in our housing choice voucher units. We were advised that would be a prudent type of coverage. And also we're exploring sexual harassment coverage.
And based on the fact that this is a non-traditional insurance provider, did we, I think we've done this in the past, but did we check the market to make sure these deals are, these are good prices?
Yes, several of the coverages are not from our non-traditional provider, which is this captive entity, because housing authorities we're just a risky business, as it were. We get sued a lot. We have old housing. Generally speaking, many housing authorities have old housing. So it's a group of large public housing authorities who put money together to create a group that insures that type of risk, or is friendly to that type of risk. And 2 years ago, when we went out to see can we get property coverage, I think we did get 2 offers that were much more expensive than what we could get internally for our coverage, and so that was helpful. Some coverages we couldn't get. And then several of the coverages you may notice in the chart, they're actually not this captive entity, this Housing Authority Risk Retention Group. For example, Hartford Steam and Boiler, they specialize in insuring boilers. And Travelers helps us with our auto liability. Philadelphia helps us with our errors and emissions. So we go to specialized providers and get the best combination of premium and coverage, the types of coverage that really protect what's going on in our organization.
Will you feel comfortable that if we bid this out to another insurance broker that we wouldn't do as well?
No.
I think it would be more expensive if we went out to another broker.
All right, thank you.
So, Mary Claire, I'm going to ask you some of the questions I asked you earlier, and I know Commissioner Slover asked you a few so it saves you. But on the question of competition, how early do we go out to the market to get pricing?
We start going out about 2 months ahead of the renewal because they don't, they want to place it given what the facts are on the ground. 2 years ago when we did all of our price comparisons, I think we went out maybe 3 months ahead of time to try to get some numbers, and they just weren't interested in working with the housing authority.
And the they that you're talking about, who's the they that weren't interested?
I'd have to get the names of the insurers, but they were other insurance providers that would typically provide property insurance.
And are you?
I don't want to tell you the wrong numbers, but I can.
That's fine. Is DCHA doing this directly with the insurance providers? Or are you working through brokers?
We work through brokers that are with HAI Group.
Is that a conflict?
Honestly, it sounds like a conflict, but they are obligated as a broker to get us the best deal. They share with us it's not really a bid, but the offers that they get for coverage. They give us the summary of the coverage, which includes the premium, the deductible, the coverage, and then the text of what's included in that coverage. And then we discuss, what makes sense for DCHA for this type of coverage.
Is there any benefit next year in competing brokers? I know from my small company, we've had the same broker for 3 years, and 2 years ago we decided we'll go out and see what other brokers could bring into us. Voila, we had better pricing. Is that something that DCHA would consider or should consider?
I think we can consider it. I mean, I think the 2 times that we've done it, we haven't found cost savings, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't try next year. I mean, the world is changing. We may find that certain coverages are better, just a better pricing through a different broker. I think, so I think it's certainly something we can look at.
And Mr. Chair, that is correct. And the issue is that insurance of public housing authorities is very narrow. It's very a niche kind of market. HAI actually provides insurance coverage for a number of housing authorities.
That's what they want to break up.
And I was going to just say, Commissioner Chair, in most states, the competition is usually only a captive that's created by housing authorities or a risk retention group that's created by housing authorities in another state. One thing that we have here in the district, we are the only entity here. So
5 years ago, the big healthcare companies were saying the same thing, and a couple of upstarts, particularly in the West, have come into the market and have thrown that paradigm on its head. I suspect that there may be something similar that could occur in this environment. So I don't want to rule out, at least involving the private sector or at least competing brokers so we can get better pricing. I have a couple of other questions and then I would yield to others. What are the biggest drivers of our increase this year or proposed increase?
So it would be the new types of coverage. And then the employment practices.
Can you spell that out for the folks who are listening online?
Of course. So the types of coverage that we're exploring would be the HQS, the housing quality inspectors that do our visual inspections for our housing choice program. So we're looking at getting coverage for those visual inspections. We're also looking at getting sexual harassment coverage. And then within the overarching commercial liability, that includes multiple different types of coverage. And one type of coverage is employment practices. And as I explained, that's one of the ones that is just going up. To get the same level of coverage, you have to pay more money.
Got it. I think those were my questions. I know Aquarius had a question.
I have something to say, and this is what I don't understand, and I want the record to reflect this. Now, if you have an insurance company and you seeing the other practices of all housing authority, and y'all not even a state, and at no time have this board has ever taken the opportunity to even examine other housing authorities and with the best practice. Now, we want our friends to come in and be the brokers and have the insurance company wrong. We just say that. Because the way I'm seeing this housing authority is being run now is half the people, if you ain't from the mayor's office, you from HUD, and if I was the director of this housing authority, I'm gonna tell you what I would do. I wouldn't be explaining the budget. I'll have somebody from HUD to explain it for you. And then maybe you can understand it. Because it's difficult being at home, looking and searching other housing authority budgets. What is the best practice? And we're not even a state. So that's sort of difficult for me, listening to other commissioners. And I want this on the record. And that's why I'm saying it. Now, what it was the best practice for this housing authority was this. You had an insurance company, and if I didn't have insurance and something was ruined in my house, with or without insurance, I received some type of compensation because your housing authority already had my units covered. So we don't do that anymore. Remember, the residents got to get their own insurance now. Now we got a question about an insurance company. Well, the insurance company didn't seem like it was a question 6 years ago when they was coming up with dollars showing you how much they was giving the housing authority. I never could understand that either. So maybe we need an insurance class before making decisions. And before we have another election, maybe people need to take a test when you come on this board and have some real training. And the training would be, look at, if you're the 9th housing authority, then you want to sure look from 8 to 1. And when I say that, I'm going to say this and then I'm going to close up. Now, when I leave this board, I don't want to be like Commissioner St. Jean, have my seat filled when I'm sworn in. Because that's a disservice to this board. That we're missing a commissioner. And I'm serious about that. This board needs to take a look at who is the board and who are you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Summer?
Not to further, complicate this insurance thing, but since the conflict of interest thing was brought up, I don't know with Mr. Garrett sitting on the board of this group, if that's an issue. People are aware of that, how that plays. It's just, I don't know. So
okay, Commissioner Slover, I appreciate that, but I have a lot of integrity. The one thing that I do not do, in fact, I have nothing but integrity. The one thing that I do not do is involve myself in the conversation. The fact that I have the ability to discuss and talk about what the insurance company does is just based on my knowledge, not only from my knowledge, because I've been involved with this organization since I was an executive director in New Jersey. So that's about 17 years of being affiliated with it, understanding their coverages and understand how they actually operate. Because the one thing about being at a smaller housing authority, I actually had to do everything. Versus being here. The one caveat being here at this particular organization is that I rely on my staff to do it. So I have not at any point in time been involved in any discussions with HAI in reference to rates or anything like that or claims. I do not do that. And Mary Grace can attest to that, and anyone at HAI can also attest to the same.
I have no doubt, and I appreciate that. What I was trying to get to was, I think it makes it that much more important that we put the work out and make sure we're getting the best price so that no one can make the assumption you're making that I'm making about you. What I'm trying to say is this provides coverage so that if someone says, hey, conflict is what people want to make of it. And so if we have competing information that says we got the best price, then there's no issue. So I'm trying to be helpful. So,
I
don't take
appreciate that.
Thank you,
And
Commissioner.
Commissioner Slover, we did review all of that. Coming in, as Mary Grace indicated, we are reviewing our insurance coverage. Mr. Garrett does not receive any pecuniary interest at all, but I understand exactly what you're saying as far as the appearance of conflict is what a lot of people focus on.
The whole board got appearance of conflict.
Great. All right, so let's, I'm going to ask for a motion to approve Resolution 20-18. Is there a motion?
Motion.
Is there a second? Seconded. Is there a roll call? Roll call, please, Alethea.
Sure. Commissioner Van Gosri,
Yes.
Commissioner Slover,
Yes.
Commissioner Forrester.
Yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Talaferro.
Yes.
Commissioner Valchecchio. Thank you. Commissioner Ortiz-Gal. I'm sorry, Commissioner Ortiz-Gal, I'll circle back. Commissioner Neil Jones.
Yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Strickland.
Yes.
I have Commissioner Ortiz-Gal is yes. Commissioner Strickland.
Yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Council.
Yes.
Chairman Albert.
Yes.
There are 10 yes, the resolution is approved.
Thank you so much. I think that is the last resolution for the day. We did not have any public comments sent in advance, but but just out of an abundance of caution, because I know we leave these meetings and then things somehow get lost in the ether. I just want to reiterate that the Board of Commissioners asked for today. I'm going to start with the request to find a way by our next meeting to ensure that there is the ability for live public comment. And so I'm going to charge our executive director and his IT team with doing that. And please reporting back to the board within the next week as to how that will occur. We made a commitment earlier on in this meeting to provide some forums. I think the word that was used was roundtable to get additional input into the spending of the $50 million as part of its repositioning, redevelopment, and renovation strategy. We're going to have within the next few days, a budget meeting. The budget meeting will look at both the operating and the capital budget with emphasis on how we're spending the reserves, what happened to the interim control dollars, and how we are, what's the plan for the 50 that's coming in from the District of Columbia government. Those were the issues that I recall. I would also like to add that with regards to insurance, next year, if I'm on this board, we'd want to see evidence that there has been competition among brokers for this work, so we can ensure that we have the best price.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, go ahead. Greg, was that you?
No, that was me, Commissioner. I was just going to say, so noted.
Great. So commissioners, our next meeting of the Board of Commissioners will be held on Wednesday, October 14, 2020 at 1 p.m. via WebEx. And for those of you watching on Facebook Live,
Neil,
you can
sorry to
send
interrupt.
advance.
There was a comment in the chat from Commissioner Forrester. I don't know if you saw it.
Yes, from Commissioner Forrester. Sorry, I missed this Commissioner
I
St. Jean.
thank you.
Commissioner Forrester.
Yeah, I did not know if I realized that Commissioner St. Jean had left the board, but I didn't know was for what reason, and when someone said that what's the next step to fill her seat. So I didn't know if you guys already had discussed that, so I didn't want to belabor it if it's already discussed.
No,
we didn't discuss it, but Commissioner St. Jean, like many of us on this board, serve at the pleasure of the mayor. Her term expired and the mayor exercised the termination. There is a process in place for a replacement. As soon as I get information on that, I will that before I do.
I think one of the questions a lot of us want to know is why the seat's empty, why it was vacated before there was a replacement.
Right, and I will just repeat what I said earlier. Like many of us on this board, we serve at the pleasure of the mayor, and the mayor appoints us, and next meeting will be held on Wednesday, October 14th, as I said, by web. And please, if you're interested, please send in testimony in advance. But we're hoping that by our next meeting, you'll be able to participate live. And so our meeting is adjourned. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Eric, did you need any clarity on the names during the meeting? Eric, this is Alethea.